Welcome back to the LoCo Experience Podcast. My guest today is Constantin Gurdgiev, and he is an associate professor of economics, among other things, at UNC. And I saw him speak at a BizWest event last fall, I guess, or early in the new year.
Early in the new year,
Yeah,
exactly correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So thanks for taking the time to be here.
My pleasure. My pleasure,
And
absolutely.
for probably most of my listeners that have never heard of you, could you just set the stage a little bit? It looks like you got your fingers in a lot of pies.
I don't know about whether they are pies or mouse traps. This is a big question always, isn't it? So, first of all, a little correction. Yes, so I'm associate professor of finance. I'm actually
Finance.
at
Sorry, not
MCB,
economics.
Monfort College of Business at UNC. That's my main job. Economics is a part of UNC as well, but they're not part of MCB. I am economist by training, so my PhD is actually, for my scenes is macroeconomics and finance,
Okay.
theoretical stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So I used to study economics. I do some economic analysis these days because I'm kind of in a weird area of finance that a lot of people miss when they are operating in the local economy. I work in a geopolitical risks and geopolitical uncertainty
Yeah, yeah.
part of finance. So it's macro stuff. So we look at the whole countries moving, the whole markets moving, wars, conflicts, sanctions, all these things.
Tariffs.
Tariffs, yes. The more on this is more of a trade factor, but then
sure.
of course, how does that impact finance? In fact, I have a couple of graduate students currently doing some work. So in addition to teaching at UNC, I also have a visiting position in Ireland, in Trinity College Dublin, and I have graduate students there. So they do a lot of work with me in terms of the research and. Tariffs, yes, absolutely. Like out of 15 students that I supervised this year, there two of them actually are doing work on tariffs.
So it's a pretty big deal.
It is a huge deal, of course. I mean, look at the markets. Yes, I mean, we've had an absolutely amazing period. I don't remember who said it. That sometimes nothing happens in decades, and then decades happen in one day or one week.
Yeah.
We had that one week exactly. Last week was unprecedented by any comparatives. But then again, when you think about from the last 25 years or so of our history, are very much unprecedented. You have the global financial crisis, which was out of traditional sync for the traditional crisis type
Yep.
of things or market reactions to things. It was systemic. It was very deep. Then we
Was
went on to
financed
exactly,
deeply.
yeah, not only finance but real economy. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
the Great Recession. You have to go back in nomenclature to Great Depression to see something like that. So it's once in 100 years event. Then we had COVID pandemic. I mean, my God, if you were in my field, you
Supply
would
chain
actually kind of
disruptions.
think like, how can we contrive something that great?
It's
Okay.
just so good to
As
study.
terrible as it is exactly, you're correct. We study things which are dismal, and this was pretty dismal event. And then, of course, we have geopolitical crisis going on since then, the 2022 Ukraine-Russia war. You have the 2016, 2017, 2020 periods in terms of the elections. And then we have new elections last year, 2024, which are historically unprecedented.
Yeah.
Whether it is political science history, it is history, it's economic policy history, it doesn't matter. So when we entered the last probably 3 weeks span of time, there were some indicators of what was happening. Some of the market participants started reacting in anticipation of that. In other words, they took the administration on this, for what they were saying, okay, as being truthful and intending to do these tariffs at that roughly speaking scale and all. But by and large, even those market participants who had this kind of, foresight
Yeah.
could not expect the level and the uncertainty and the volatility of the decision making that we have
Right.
witnessed.
Oh, and it's on, it's off.
Yeah, it's on, it's off. Yeah, exactly.
It's
I mean,
delayed
like,
for 30
yeah,
days. It's delayed for 90 days.
if we wore a piece of steel, we would turn into Damascus quality steel. The epic stuff. Yes, what was that?
Samurai sword style.
Targaryen or something like that from the Game
Yeah,
of Thrones. Yes, I forgot the name that they used there. But we're not still. We're human beings, and so we're scared. We're uncertain. We are panicked.
Yeah.
Behaviorally, we are imperfect. Our decision making in kind of circumstances
As you can
like
see
that.
from markets that go
Correct.
like
Yeah,
this.
absolutely.
Right?
Yes. And we kind of think of the markets as more rational than the average agent. Well, we kind of saw that. They're not.
Fair enough. I was actually listening to Dave Ramsey on Whose podcast? Oh, Sean Sean Ryan show, I
Okay.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something like that. Um, Something Ryan. Anyway, and he was talking about how kind of the Reagan pulling us out of the recession of the late 70s a little bit was so much more about people's mindsets shifting than it was actually about this regulation or this tax or this thing. And he was optimistic that once we can stop the gyrations, maybe people will kind of,
Sentiment is huge.
yeah.
Absolutely, beyond any doubts. We as humans react to that. That's called leadership. In fact, most of the politics, most of the political leadership, when you go back in history and look at it, it's not about capability. It's about projection. It's about message. Reagan happened to have the correct message. If you look back today at what Reagan was saying about, say, for example, immigration policies, what he was saying about economy, what he was saying about the balancing act between the winners in the economy and the losers in the economy, and then you lay the path beyond Reagan, because of course 8 years of Reagan have been transformative, and they laid the foundation for the kind of what we call compassionate conservatism of the early 1990s. Of course, it all dies in the mid 1990s, yes, with Newt Gingrich revolution, and compassionate part disappears.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, so when you look at that progression, Reagan really strikes a great comparative. He is a big transformative type of a president who was mostly not resting on the competency of execution, but rather on the quality of messaging and conviction. We miss Reagan today, definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that because I would approve of Reagan's policies being deployed today. Some of them are meaningful. Again, remember that Reagan was the last president we had who have enacted substantial enough, fundamental enough immigration reform, which was an immigration reform which reinforced our ethos of this nation,
Yeah.
the ethos of the melting pot, the ethos of opportunity land, yes?
And then did it, like, was it restricted from there, or just too many people wanted to sign up for it over time? And
No, it's not
where did the
that.
system break
I mean,
down?
the system broke down because it became. There's no perfect system can survive through the test of time, because time changes things. The flows have changed of migrants. The objectives of the migrants have changed. We needed to keep the system adjusting to that. We needed reforms. After Reagan, there was no reform of the
Yeah.
immigration policy at all. We had kind of patchwork, kind of in an old
Where it was
lingo.
clearly broken.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, we were first putting plaster on basically, like razor cuts. Yes, then on shark bites.
Yeah.
The plaster didn't change. We still were applying
wasn't
the
up to the
same
job
medicine.
anymore.
No, you couldn't hold that. We knew that because the entire immigration reform has culminated in DACA. And, it culminated in basically, if you use the parlance of the 1990s, Bill Clinton's policies, yes, don't ask, don't tell. We have these people here. We would like to normalize them. We can't normalize them. They deserve to be normalized.
Right.
We can't normalize them. They should be here. We can't normalize them. But let's pretend that that's okay.
Right.
And so, in
Yeah,
the end,
it's
the
interesting.
dreamers,
Yeah.
and in the end, that was effectively the nail in the coffin of in my view, as an outsider coming into the United States, of what was the great promise, the shining, city on the hill, the torch that has led the countries and societies to transformation, not only in terms of the outward mobility of people, sending them to the United States, but also internal mobility of people and internal
Yeah.
political changes as well. So,
It seems like our populations in the U.S. have become, and maybe it's for lack of recessions and things, but more reluctant to move around for opportunities and to leave the inner city crappy economies and
things
move
that's-
to North Dakota and work in an oil well, whatever.
well, it's not so much moving to North Dakota and working on the oil well, okay? I mean, you are striking something, you're touching upon something that is empirical regularity, which has transformed or changed the balance of economic power and economic dynamism between the continents over the last, say, 50 years. If you go back to the 1990s, United States is an example of the high internal mobility of people, as you mentioned, people looking for opportunities.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean going to North Dakota. It means a doctor moving from, say, for example, rural Texas to the urban
Yeah.
New
Or
Jersey.
people
Okay,
bringing Fort Collins population
correct.
up from 50 to 150.
And but also when you talk about the population numbers, it is a mobility which was driven by opportunity. It was mobility of the younger middle class,
Yeah.
lower middle class.
Kind of that go west young man
Exactly.
mentality.
Bingo. You've got it. Okay. What happened in this century is that with the Great Recession, and even before the Great Recession, with the cost of housing rising, with the pressures in the cost of living, pressures of a cost of education and healthcare, all of those three major expenditures that happen over the life cycle that we have depressed mobility of people. It depressed social mobility of people and economic mobility of people. Fewer people move today from the lower middle class to the upper middle class than before. Fewer people move today from, say, for example, the one location to the next location.
Yeah.
COVID pandemic a little bit disrupted that, but that
Yep,
kind of was
yep.
very short
Well,
term.
and the ability for remote work and
Correct.
stuff, you know,
That's
so people
where
are
COVID
moving to
pandemic came
Oklahoma
in.
for the cheap living, but keeping
Bingo.
their job in
Bingo.
San Francisco.
Exactly. And that was the only part of the departure. When you look at other continents, where you look at Asia Pacific, for example, where the kind of the breakdown, economic reduction of the virulency of nationalism has led to the greater mobility of people. You look at Europe, where the European unification process and the European Union has fostered. It's not just
It
European
adds a lot of
because when you
liquidity
look
to
at
their opportunities.
bingo, exactly, but it's also liquidity to ability to move. Schengen
Yeah.
zone.
The Poles all go to Germany for
Correct,
college.
correct. And I remember I was in the European Union at the time, living when Poland became the part of the European Union, and the debate that was happening right before the accession, before 2004, where the people from those countries coming in should be allowed all of the rights of working privileges, ability to access social welfare nets and supports and healthcare supports and things like that. And I was at the front of that debate as well in Ireland, where we were kind of caught in between as a society. In the end, Ireland made that decision that people coming into European Union should have immediate access to all of the benefits of being a part of the European Union. It gave a huge boost to Irish economy.
Sure.
And you had so much skills coming into the country, so much.
Oh, their standard of
ability
living has
yeah,
crazy
exactly,
increase
of
over
course.
a 30-year period.
That's true, but that was
But they were super
remember,
poor before
there's
that,
a lot
right?
of there's a lot of changes that have happened before it. So the accession of 2004 and subsequent additions to the European Union and the mobility within the European Union has benefited Ireland beyond any belief. Any belief.
Yeah.
When you look at actually microcosm of Colorado, in a way, the history of Colorado compared to, say, for example, the history of Wyoming, is indicative of exactly the same dynamics. You have Colorado has always been more open to the economic development, to the mobility of people, more welcoming to people
Yeah.
coming in.
Well, the weather's way
building
nicer.
here. Well, yeah, mountains are better, and fly fishing is better. I can talk about that. Yes, there's a reason I live in Colorado as well. Yes, but beyond everything else, there's one thing that you want. You want people to come in on the basis of the merit selection. You want people to come in to pursue the dream. You want people to come in to build their own, build new things, add value. Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And we've benefited through that in Colorado's history in the past. It's changing. Today's migration in the last probably, say, 3 to 4 years, you can see the pivotal change. We have more of an older community coming in. The younger community is being pushed out to the east. And
People's
the problem,
kids have moved here from California,
Yes.
and now they have kids of their own, so the grandparents move here from...
That's okay.
Whatever.
That's not the problem. The problem becomes when the people's kids start moving out of Colorado.
I see.
And that is something that we're witnessing today. It's already starting, okay? We already have it, say, for example,
Yeah.
Ph.D. school district, there is reductions in terms of the kids' enrollments. They overestimated the impact. They kind of got
Yeah.
too cautious in their own planning, so that's a little bit of a correction there. But you can see that trend happening. The problem when that is repeated, when that process continues over, say, decade plus, we're risking getting to the point, like the rest of the United States, that we become ossified.
Yeah.
And when you become ossified, you become less and less competitive. And measuring that is hard. Measuring the competitiveness is hard.
What is Colorado doing wrong, if I may interject?
Well, I mean, okay.
Or is
I
it
mean,
just
look,
running out
I
of
think it's not
momentum?
so much. I don't think it's so much as something that is what Colorado is doing wrong, but rather from my perspective, what Colorado is not doing. So we were driving from Salt Lake City this weekend, and it's a long drive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should have been
And
listening to the LoCo
yeah.
Experience
Well,
Podcast.
it's kind of my, my better half is kind of my local experience podcast. So two of us were talking
She keeps you
about
busy.
this. We were talking exactly about this, and she's a professional in marketing. She does strategical marketing advisory in the beverages industry.
Okay.
And so the two of us were talking about this. I'm a big fan of organic local growth. What we mean by this is that it is growth which starts on the basis of the demand locally, and it organically finances itself instead of attracting high-speed growth rates
Yep.
by bringing in capital from the outside. It organically, gradually grows, but it grows at fast enough rates to actually escape the velocity or escape the pull or the gravity rather, okay, to gain escape velocity, to escape that gravity of the immediate local market.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I think Colorado is not doing enough is that it is not creating a momentum in the core sectors where we can be super competitive and super innovative. And I'll mention those sectors that I
Please.
think,
Yeah.
in terms of growing internal local talent and in terms local enterprise,
Yeah.
whether it is for profit enterprise or for non-profit enterprise. So the sectors I mean are actually agri-food.
Okay.
It's very important,
Yep.
high value added, tremendously big universe of agri-food. We think of agri-food as farmers, but it isn't. It's not just farmers. It's
Sure.
processing of food.
Yep.
It's the creation of new types of food. It is also research and development. It's associated marketing. It's associated biotech.
Yep.
You start going through the lines of enterprises and areas that support the proper agri-food sector. Again, I fall back on Ireland because I spent 16 years there. Great example. High value added agriculture, high value added food production. The country which started with having effectively no cuisine of its own to being a heavyweight in global markets. You can buy Irish agri-food products today in the shelves in Colorado.
That's neat.
You can't buy Colorado goods out there.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Okay. So that's one stepping stone. But there's other associated sectors. So for example, then food retailing,
Right. And transportation.
restaurants,
Yep.
okay, transportation, you're right, completely. There's associated things with that, hospitality, entertainment sector,
Yep, yep.
okay. Integrating our natural assets such as mountains, for example, yes, and everything that goes with it, together with the food sector, with the drink sector, which we have very healthy in terms of beers, we have a very nation weak but trying to rise wine production sector, which is very interesting. I'm fascinated by that, and yet, again, because of my better half, I am blessed to be able to go to the Governor's Cup and enjoy and meet people who are passionate, who are great. They're trying. They're at the very beginning compared to, say, for example, the French, Italians, the Californians. They're not there. But can they get to that level?
Yeah.
They can. Because they have passion, because they have talent.
Yeah.
It will take generations. So supporting this type of the organic development, organic growth that starts small, starts locally anchored. You travel to somewhere. There's
Yeah,
a
those
couple of
wineries
places.
in Palisade, they weren't
Exactly.
selling anything outside of Colorado 10, 15 years ago, mostly.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine.
But now they are.
Let people come in here. And that's how a lot of, for example, if you take big production regions like, say, Paso Robles in California, yes? Paso Robles started by selling grapes to Napa and to Sonoma producers because they could grow great grapes, but they couldn't make great wine necessarily. Though, right adjoining Paso Robles is Chalon, which was a part of the challenge of Paris,
Okay.
of course, so you have kind of some individual producers like that. But by growing grapes, they started acquiring the expertise. So by about, say, 80s, they start getting to production of their own wine. They start with small volumes. They start organically selling it at the vineyards and to their own clients' lists. You had to travel there to discover them. Once you traveled and discovered them, you became the customer, the word of mouth and things like that. It's now a multi-billion-dollar industry there. It is a rival to the major producers like Monterey, for example, and Central Coast. It is certainly has beat, I think, Santa Barbara area.
Okay.
And it is kind of the third largest producer on the West Coast,
that's
yes?
neat.
But it's also the quality of the production. So, for example, if you think about kind of the scale of things, yes, Back in the 1970s, you would buy maybe a vineyard, or 1980s, a vineyard there for $3 million, $4 million.
Okay.
I think last year there was Dow Brothers sold their vineyard for $900 million, and it's not a huge
And you can't even
vineyard.
get one for 20 million.
No, no. I mean, no,
50,
forget it.
100.
You might get like a backyard for 20 million. I mean, you might park the tractor in it. But,
Half an acre.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so it's not Dow Brothers is not a very big, huge kind of buy if you want footprint, but you can buy their stuff everywhere, and it is a high-end wine. It is a high-quality wine. It's a rival to the big European producers.
Is there that much margin in it? I guess if you got the really good reputation, it doesn't cost that
Economics
much
of
more.
winemaking are very
Right.
complicated.
If you can sell it for $200 a
fascinating as
bottle,
well,
then there's a lot of margin.
You can produce some things for $200 a bottle. I think the bulk of it would be in a $50-$60 territory, which is sufficient enough margin.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is also, a lot of that is based on auxiliary additional sales.
Sure.
Beyond wine, there is events and things like that as well. A lot of it is based on a brand reputation. Brand reputation is important. Brand capital is super important. In finance, for example, we have difficulty valuing those things because we always need to attach the dollar amount. That's something that I love working with my students, on, and give them the appreciation and understanding of how complex the forms of capital we really face today. It isn't just about a loan. It is about what is the underlying asset supporting that loan.
Yeah.
What are you acquiring? We used to think in terms of buildings. We used to think in terms of machinery and equipment.
Sure.
Not really. We now think in terms of the brands. We now think in terms of the access to the capital. Think of NVIDIA, yes?
Yeah.
NVIDIA is a great example. Doesn't have factories.
Yeah.
Its entire
they're
value is
contractors.
in its own designs, in its own patents, in its own intellectual property. You can't touch that.
Right.
You can't really physically move it from one file to another file,
Yeah.
from one side of the room to another side of the room. You can ship it, though, across the borders. And you can find locations and domiciles for it where you would extract the greatest value. And again, you think of, say, for example, Ireland, Holland, Denmark. These are big traditional locations for the offshoring or domiciling of intellectual property. They hold vast amounts of intellectual property for pharmaceutical companies,
Sure.
for the companies like NVIDIA, for other tech companies, and so forth. I mean, Colorado, actually, by the way, when going now from the hospitality sector, from things that we kind of think of traditionally, this is just past services, which is not true, should not be seen as such, because it is high value added service. It can be high, not just high margin, but also significant volume. So the revenue streams from it can be significant, and employment effects. We can go also to the more modern economy, and we can look at where Colorado is really successful and so far has been competitive, but is being pressured. Airspace, for example. Okay, in the airspace area, we're competing with the likes of Texas. We're competing with the likes of, say, California. How are we going to compete when the scale in those two locations alone, and then of course we also have the state of Washington, where the scale there is so much greater, bigger
Right.
than it is in Colorado.
And that gravity just kind of draws those
Exactly.
smart people to that place.
Yes,
Partly.
that's true. And they also have policies to do so. Well, California less so, Texas now much more so, of course. We have Georgia, for example, which is trying to incentivize that. Alabama,
Yeah.
there's a heated competition
Yeah.
around the United
Well,
States.
I just came back from Hollywood. I was in Orange County over the weekend, and we went up to Hollywood or LA for the day
Yep.
and walked the boardwalk there and stuff. And it was like just thinking about how Hollywood can keep its mojo at this point in time. You got states like Georgia, states like Montana and Idaho bidding to have films and crews there. Their actors are a lot cheaper and a lot more eager to sign
Sure.
on for nondescript roles and stuff. And so the monopoly of Hollywood seems like
mean,
it's at least being threatened.
Hollywood doesn't make money by shooting movies.
Right.
I mean, Hollywood makes money by having intellectual property in those movies. This is why Hollywood doesn't make movies inside Hollywood anymore. They're all over the place. From our point of view, though, it's really great to see that finally we're starting to recognize that the idea that we have the Rocky Mountains in the movie, but it's really in Canada filmed,
Right.
is really something fundamentally screwed up, yes? So I'm really glad that we're trying to bring more and more incentives, more proactive incentives in terms of supporting film production here in Colorado. Again, a great sector, which can be, again, scaled. If you just a location for production, that's one thing, for filming. you need to have production, you need to have studios, you need to have
Yeah,
computing
people that know how to do that
facilities.
stuff.
Correct. You need to have talent. We have computational facilities. We have ability to bring more of those. So, for example, things like data centers. Data centers, we always think of, hey, that's IT. Yes, but without data centers, you cannot have processing.
Yeah.
Shipping it, sending it across the satellite networks is time consuming, lag dependent, and expensive. So having the support of the backbone of the infrastructure here probably is a good idea. And if you start with that, you start and going then, of course, how do we provide water for cooling? Okay, how do we provide energy? What sources of energy we're using,
Yeah,
what the
yeah.
cost of energy. So all of a sudden, these traditional sectors that we always thought of, hey, like this is a dirty industrial stuff behind the scenes, it becomes closely aligned with modern sectors of production and investment. Yes, so it is a part of the economic development that is very hard to crack.
One of the things I've said a number of times over the last few years is that in these days, especially during like COVID, when they created so much money, flooded the system
Yeah,
almost with it to keep the liquidity going and whatever. But energy is more like money than money is like money anymore, because you can't just print energy. You got to pull it out of the ground or suck it out of the
that's right.
sun or
Yeah,
whatever. And all those data centers and things like that, computers sound nice and clean and stuff, and all the little stuff that happens behind the screen when I push buttons, but it's really, a bunch of coal and natural gas mostly being burned so that those data
yeah.
centers can spin.
Tremendous, yes, absolutely. And the energy mix here in Colorado is very problematic, yes, because of course, us using to reduce the cost of energy using coal is definitely questionable. We have natural gas, one of the very big producers. We should be using that more of that. There's a big concern from our point of view that the scale of the, say, for example, AI, quantum computing, and general computing as well, scale of use and demand for energy is so much higher
Right.
than anything we have experienced before, that really you're looking at the base generation which has to rely on nuclear. You can't use either fossils or intermittent,
Kind of need to bring
renewables.
more
You'll
base
have to
online.
bring big base, and you have to bring nuclear. Problem from our perspective for nuclear is cooling.
Yeah.
And that is something that we are overcoming as the technology develops. Yes. So, for example, things like small modular reactors require
Yeah.
much less scaled, cooling. You
Cooling
can have
system.
cooling which is based on the basically reservoir,
Yeah.
as opposed to the traditional cooling. You have to have a massive river, or you have to have a massive supply of ocean
Gotcha.
water or something like
Gotcha.
that. Yes?
Gotcha.
So that gives us a little bit of an advantage. So we should start thinking about how do we integrate the modular reactors into the energy production and grid here. If you look, for example, also at the other sources, like, say, water again,
Yep.
we should start thinking more proactively. How do we create the water sources and access to water and quality of water, which is filtering, of course, and bringing it up to standards that can support modern technologies? For example, fab manufacturing for the
Yeah.
processors, microprocessors, chips, and things like that. Yes,
Yeah. It requires a lot of
all of them,
coolant
a
as
lot
well.
of them are going into Arizona,
Mm-hmm.
where there is no water.
Yeah. Why?
Well, I mean, because of the incentives. They have very strong incentives, and because they now have developed the processes where it's almost like sealed loop use of water. So you
Okay.
do not have to rely on a continuous
Well, and I
sources of
suppose
water.
evaporative cooling is actually pretty efficient there when it's 100 degrees and
Exactly.
6% relative
Exactly.
humidity.
So we should be at that race as well. We should be at those games as well. We got the quantum computing corridor here, which is awesome, which is great to have. Okay. Great win to the governor, great win to the people in Denver. Fantastic. But we now need to branch out of it to provide the support for computational facilities, for not just quantum computing, but all of the adjoining and related
Yeah.
industries.
Yeah.
So you can see how many opportunities we have.
Yeah.
Exploring those opportunities is, we're blessed with them. Okay, exploring those opportunities requires a certain way of changing the way we do things. One of the things that I observed here, and I observed that on the relationship between, say, for example, within the northern Colorado, between the cities within the northern
Yeah.
Colorado, we were exploring the possibility of getting an NSF grant to support the kind of ideation stage of the policy formation for the integrated development of infrastructure systems within the northern Colorado.
Yeah.
And the whole thing came to a screeching halt because the different cities don't want to talk to each other. It's almost like we want to build our own little empire. And then the
Yeah.
little empire becomes, I used kind of the example of Pueblo. Used to be a larger city in Colorado. In
Oh, is that right?
Colorado. Yeah, it was actually bigger before than Colorado Springs.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it kind of decayed over a period of time due to internal and external neglect, effectively. Okay, it became a kind of a spot for high unemployment, for example.
Yeah.
It also became a city where there was much less of the different diverse development in terms of the economic development,
Yep.
more linked to the combination of the kind of traditional sectors.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Colorado Springs took the wind out of it completely.
Right. Right.
Okay, so
Well, and do you think being closer to Denver helped Colorado Springs anyway?
of course it does,
Yeah.
beyond any doubts. But can you pair that? Can you respond to that through
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
more coordinated? I wasn't actually suggesting that Pueblo should have competed with Colorado Springs directly. I'm saying Colorado Springs and Pueblo should have cooperated more.
Mm. Mm.
We are beyond that kind of economy where you can have a very competitive adversarial relationship.
Yeah.
It is more about the economy where you have to find mutual ways to build added value, create added value. So my argument has been, for example, that in order for the northern Colorado to thrive and survive into the next, say, couple of decades, if not longer beyond that, we have to compete with Denver. We have to compete with Denver-Boulder corridor.
Yeah.
In order to do so, we cannot afford not to cooperate across the border with Cheyenne.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot afford not to cooperate with the likes of between the Fort Collins, Greeley, and Loveland. Okay, and we need to start building concerted cooperative channels of infrastructure, transport infrastructure, roads infrastructure, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, but also energy infrastructure, water infrastructure, and also intellectual property infrastructure or intellectual mobility infrastructure.
Mm.
We need to have a high quality connectivity between the different areas. We need to have the interlinked and coordinated policies between the universities here, community colleges here, all the way down to middle schools.
Mm.
We need to stop building little empires and start focusing on the
Yeah.
region
Yeah.
overall.
I think my sense is that the chambers of commerce like each other quite a bit within those three cities, but that the government authorities are a little different game in some
It's
ways.
very interesting. Yeah, I get that feeling that there is a bit more cooperation when you start talking to, say, for example, people responsible for economic policy.
Yeah.
But that's because in every textbook they
They
know
learn how
cooperative
it
game
works.
comes, with a better outcome than non-cooperative game.
Fair enough.
Yes,
Fair
I
enough.
mean you don't want to have prisoner's dilemma. Yes, and we have enough common, if you want, vocabulary to kind of say, yeah, we know what prisoner's dilemma leads to. You know,
We rise together. Yeah.
but when you take politicians today, and this is very interesting, I think it's a very astute observation because I think it also is the mark of our times. What you are putting your finger on is exactly that polarization that we have
Yeah.
in a policy spectrum comes from the political spectrum polarization. And the political spectrum polarization is evident all the way to the Washington, D.C.
Mm.
How much cooperation does the Congress today achieve?
Yeah, almost zero.
Exactly. When you go back in history, has there been a transformational president in the United States history who has not become transformational president by achieving consensus and achieving or leading the majority within the
Yeah,
Congress?
yeah.
Of course not.
Would think not. Yeah.
Exactly. So we can't do anything because we have this kind of politics of extreme polarization.
Yeah. Yeah. We've spent a fair bit of time on northern Colorado, which has been super interesting, but
Cool.
I want to zoom up a little bit.
Okay.
Your LinkedIn profile suggests you're kind of an expert in Russian and Irish economic factors and things, and I want to talk about financing war, financing economies. Part of what I've said, I'm a libertarian-minded guy for a long time, and one of Reagan's old quotes, I think, is, tax what you want less of and subsidize what you want more of. And I generally abide by that notion. And so if we could get to a less income tax financed economy, government function in the U.S. and do so through some combination of tariffs and I've been a fan of the fairtax.org,
Okay.
kind of a consumption tax, because
yeah.
we kind of want less consumption anyway, according to all the, the climate uh, people and stuff like that. And so, like, instead of trying to get people to hide their income or not make any income, like, let's just tax consumption more.
Yeah, that's okay. Look, there are different ways of taxation. There are different tools for taxation. Some of it has been tried in different jurisdictions and generates different results. Consumption tax is very interesting. Yes, we have a sales tax in the United States. Sales tax is non-discriminatory insofar as it is applies to, say, for example,
Yep.
where you manufacture the goods or services,
Yep.
where you produce them. It is also non-discriminatory insofar as which components you use, okay, in the production. Yes, so it is more of a tax on the actual consumption rather than a tax on the value added.
True.
Okay, in the European Union, for example, in the rest of the world, it is mostly the value added tax, which is again not as discriminatory on the basis of where the things are made, but rather on the basis of who adds value pays the tax.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a lot of interesting things which go with both of those. There's some advantages and disadvantages for those things. Okay, but when we go towards greater automation, when we go towards a greater contribution of technological capital in the production and in the value added, you're right. We want to go away from the idea of income tax because income tax penalizes work
Yeah.
by us.
Yeah.
Whether it's work when we invest in ourselves and our parents invest in us by educating us, or it's a work that we pursue ourselves by
Turning
training
wrenches or
ourselves,
whatever. Yeah.
or it is a physical work that we do, literally spending hours on the job doing whatever we do. Okay, it's the effort which you actually want to reward rather than penalize.
Yeah.
So I would be all in favor of moving away from the income tax based economy. Okay, the United States is not quite an income tax based economy; it's mostly debt based economy.
Right.
Okay? So we're not taxing.
Yeah. Good
I
thing we
would
don't
be
tax
I
our
would be
people
in
what it
favor
takes.
of shifting completely towards the consumption taxes and wealth taxes. And the reason why wealth taxes are important, okay, is because you have to realize that a lot of wealth at a high level, not the level that you and I are familiar with, okay, but at the level of say billionaires
Yeah.
and multimillionaires, a lot of that wealth is the income. These people don't need to pay income tax at
Right.
all because they're living off or leveraging their wealth.
Yep.
Okay, so we can introduce a tax on wealth which is not prohibitive to the general upper middle class and below part of the population. We can tax the 1%. I'm not saying I'm not in a territory of the Sanders,
rich.
Bernie Sanders or anything like that by any possible means. I come from the libertarian tradition of thinking as well, just like yourself, especially on economic side. I mean, have background studying under the University of Chicago School of Economics. So I would be in favor of that. Let's also add to that another tax, which is, I've done some work in an Irish context because it was a part of the International Monetary Fund review of the Irish taxation policies after the global financial crisis and so forth. And that's the tax on land. Site value tax or land value tax, practiced in some parts of, say, for example, Pennsylvania in the United States, some other parts as well in the United States, and it's a very
This is different than property tax.
it's different. It is assessed against the value of the site on which the property sits. So you and I can
so
make an
strictly the
effort
land, not the
and
improvement.
improve the land, okay? But our own improvements are not going to be taxed. What will be taxed if, say, for example, a local government decides to put a school nearby nearby your site, and that increases the value of the site without you doing anything.
Interesting.
That value then will be captured in the value of land,
Sure.
not in the value of the structure that you have or the garden that you have there growing or whatever else.
Yeah.
Okay. So alternatively, of course, what happens when the government decides to put a highway next to your house, in which case your value of the land drops and you get effectively partially compensated through the lower taxation.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. So I mean, again, there has been research done in the United States on that, primarily actually on the Georgia Society and the likes,
Okay.
and there's a lot of interest in that. So
Go back to the wealth tax with me. Is that something that would be like not on a transfer of wealth, like an inheritance thing, but more like a pay 0.5% every year?
yeah, no, it would be actually based on the actual value of wealth. You can have it on an annual basis. I think inheritance tax, we already have that.
All right.
It's fine with me. I think, you have, just like with, say, for example, flat taxes, you have a very generous upfront deduction. So again, you're not snaring into the
Yeah,
net
yeah, yeah.
people who are,
If I've got a $300,000 house, I shouldn't have to
yeah,
pay an
no,
extra
yeah,
five
no,
thousand
no, no,
dollars a
yeah,
year
yeah,
on it.
yeah, no, absolutely, of course. Or you have, if you are inheriting a house which is,
Hmm.
family house which is $2 million, don't pay anything on it.
Right,
That's
right.
fine with me, okay? You don't use this taxation in order to generate revenue alone. You use this taxation to reorient the society's values.
Yeah, yeah.
You want to have the value in a society where people not accumulating houses as wealth, but rather accumulating other things like businesses,
Hmm.
like ideas,
Mm.
like human capital. So when you think about it, do we want to
Hmm.
encourage formation of fixed capital formation in this economy? Probably not so much. Yes, we
Right.
want to have good infrastructure at a high level, of course, at a high kind of, if you want, aggregate level. Yes,
Sure.
we want to have good roads. We want to have good communications and so forth. But, apart from that, we want to have usable real estate that we live in. It doesn't require a huge amounts of the parts of GDP invested
Well, and
on an ongoing basis.
some of our policies, like I was just thinking about the interest deduction on your home mortgage or your rental property mortgage or whatever. That's an incentive to carry debt,
Correct.
really.
Yes.
And I don't know why we should have taxes
But
that
we do that.
necessarily
But
incentivize
we
that.
do that not because we want to incentivize the carry of the debt where it's originated from. But today, it's because we can't abolish that. Because if we abolish that, all of a sudden,
It's
even
wreck
what
a
we
bunch
call
of pro
affordable
formas.
houses are going to
Right.
become unaffordable instantaneously. So we, in a way, kind of create. It's if you go back to the
Yeah, you can't
philosophy
really
of
white
knowledge.
sheet it.
Yeah, like in the physics, yes, in the old days, in the Ptolemaic, kind of world, yes, you had to draw these weird things called epicycles. Yes,
Hmm.
they are force fields which didn't exist in order to counterbalance the planets so as to make the Earth the center of the universe. Yes, and sooner or later you started to come to the point where those epicycles are the descriptors of everything, and they don't exist.
Right.
So you got a problem. The same with our tax and subsidies policy. And this is a painful day today, of course, yes? I mean, because we're talking on the 15th of April. I mean, you're talking
Yeah.
about, I think it's a great example, okay? You can have a middle class family like my own, where your tax forms amount to about 170 pages.
Yeah.
It is insane. It is literally
100%.
insane. Okay, so taxation system in the United States, and I'm not kind
Yeah,
of
the burden of doing your taxes is
correct.
almost as bad as
It's
the
an
taxes that
industry.
you actually pay.
It's a total industry, and it holds us hostage once a year.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
and if you're in business, it holds you hostage more
Every
often.
quarter,
Yeah, exactly.
every
Yeah.
payroll.
That's right. Yes. So I mean, the insanity of it is that we don't even think about the fact that we have all of this infrastructure that creates no value.
Yeah.
And we can have a simplifying reforms and we can have a change. As you said, for example, a good example would be moving towards more consumption-based taxes. A good example would be to remove as much as possible and flatten out thereafter the structure of, say, income tax.
Yeah, maybe a 12-page tax return.
Yeah, well, we shouldn't. Like if you are working, say, for example, if you have one source of income, active income, and maybe one source of passive income, you should not be filing the form, more than, say, 2-3 pages.
Agreed.
Who the hell needs all of that
Yeah.
stuff? Who the hell actually checks all of that stuff? Who manages all of
There's
that
a lot
stuff?
of jobs reliant upon having all those pages to check, I
To be
guess.
honest, personally, I think that most of those jobs are pretending to do the job.
Oh, yeah.
And in the end, there's an outcome, and everyone is sitting and praying that nobody will check. Because to be frank, I don't think there is a possibility of, fully completing those hundreds of pages of tax forms without missing something somehow. I mean, it's
But then
like,
that's tax fraud and they can throw you in prison.
well, of course, if it is
If it
intended,
seems like you tried it.
yes, yeah. If it is intended, it's tax fraud. But I mean, again, the separation between what is the tax fraud versus the tax mistake
yeah.
is kind of a little bit more arbitrary than I would like that to be. But I can tell you that I was talking to a colleague of mine who is a professor of finance here in
Yeah.
the United States, not in this state, today, and we were both kind of was supposed to be working on a paper that we're supposed to review, and both of us can't actually review the paper because we are both mired into taxes completely. I mean, and this is, these are two people with the PhDs in economics and finance who are struggling.
Yeah.
And we have advisors hired for that.
All right.
So it wasn't like, struggling, by ourselves, doing it. So there's something fundamentally wrong with the system that we have.
Yeah.
It is not incentivizing things we want to incentivize.
Yeah.
It is penalizing quite often effort by people.
Hmm.
It is penalized, and it over decades and generation that translates into the change in culture, in
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
preferences.
yeah.
And once you get to that territory of kind of change, the rot is so deep that changing it and reversing it is not impossible, but so daunting that a lot of people give up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's a lot of young kids right now even that are like, no way I'll ever buy a house, and
Correct? Yeah.
you know what? If you save 10% of your income and live like a coyote for a long time, that's a lie. You'll
Yeah.
be able to
Yeah.
eventually.
Yes, no, look, I mean, again, it's hard to. First of all, we expect the young people. I have two kids. One is 18, another one is 14, and it's very hard to expect from those kids to behave the way we want them to behave
Yeah.
because our generation, has created for them the trappings of social media, of peer pressure, of kind of
Of high
norms and
expectations. They're
compliances.
all
Yeah.
carrying $1,000 phones in their
Correct,
pockets
correct.
right now.
So you can say things like, you shouldn't be doing that, and they turn around and say, "But Dad, you work for that. You create that. You use that
Yeah, yeah.
yourself all of the time." So in a way, it is very hard to see how we're going to get out of this, you know, the problem and predicament that we have that has grown over the last, say, 25 years or so. And I'm using millennium as a break point, but it started, of course, before the millennium, yes? How we're going to go not so much back, but forward towards the values that we have lost,
Hmm.
that we would like to have, we know we should have, and yet
Hmm.
we have worked so hard to dismiss.
Talk to me about. By the way, I didn't even ask. You've got an accent. It seems you're from somewhere Eastern European. I
Yes.
would guess.
Oh, I'm a mix of pretty much everything under the sun. Very trying to be very quick, just tell you the story. I was born and raised in Soviet Union,
Okay.
in Moscow. I'm of Russian and Armenian descent.
Okay.
I immigrated into the United States in
So like
1990.
Armenian because one of your parents like got
Yeah,
pushed
so
out from the genocide there in Turkey and stuff, or
right,
was it
it
common for
was a
people to
little bit
go
before.
between?
It was before. Yeah, it was
Okay.
common. Yeah, of course,
Well, and there's a
because
little
yeah.
enclave of Armenia up there by Lithuania or something too, right? Or somewhere.
No. You think about in Azerbaijan. That's a
Yeah.
whole
Oh,
war, but
okay.
that's
Yeah.
the Soviets created that mess.
Okay.
So
We
yeah,
should-
there's a war going on there, of course. Yeah, but Armenia always kind of had link ups
Okay,
with Russia
okay.
because of the orthodoxy, because of the religion, and
I
because
see.
of course cultural as well. So my predecessors from Armenia moved to Russia proper back in the
Oh, okay.
1840s.
Gotcha.
Hence my last name is Russified.
Okay.
Back in the days, if you went to Imperial University, you had to Russify your name and accept Christianity. Of course, they already were Christian and they Russified the name. So that's kind of the
Fair enough. Okay.
etymology of it. So I was born in the Soviet Union. I grew up in the Soviet Union. And in my year 21 of my age, I moved to the United States,
Oh, wow.
to California. And I spent 1990s in the United States.
For education
No,
or
I first moved actually
adventure?
because
Or?
I had a business. I had
Okay.
a business that was started with two American partners
Okay.
from California. They registered in California, and then sooner or later, because they had their own businesses they had to run, I had to come to LA to run the business.
Okay.
I was kind of managing it on the Soviet
What
side
kind
at
of a
first.
business? What?
It was a brokerage company, so we
Okay.
were trying to broker joint ventures between and investment flows between the Soviet enterprises and the U.S.-based companies.
Sure.
And it was successful on the side of finding the projects. And then kind of course, the recession of the 1990s killed us off. So I moved in 1990 to the United States to run the business. And it was actually very easy to do back then because there wasn't really anyone else moving from Soviet Union doing any business.
Right.
So, and then I ended up closing the business when we became kind of, we ran into basically cash flow problems. And, we had investors lined up. We couldn't, get over the hump.
Yeah.
And so in 1993, I figured out that I have to go and finish my education. And I studied engineering back in the Soviet Union at the time. So I went to UCLA and I said, I'd like to finish my degree. They looked at my transcript. Back in the days, it was before computers, so it was a very big book that they actually found my school in Moscow. translated my grades into the UCLA scale or whatever it was, and they
Interesting.
kind of said, "What would you like to study?" And I said, I always want to do something international. So they said, you have too much mathematics and physics
Oh.
in order to do international studies. But there is an economics degree, and you can do, basically an international specialization in economics.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew nothing about economics. I knew it was international. I always wanted to study something international. So I said, fine. So I came into the third year into UCLA, finished that, went on to the master's, then went on to do the PhD.
At Chicago both? Or...
No. First, actually at UCLA, I did my master's in mathematics there, and then I went to Chicago, to University of Chicago, to do the PhD.
I see.
Wasn't a happy time for me. It was a bit personal, kind of tough year. So I transferred from there to Johns Hopkins. And I was in Johns Hopkins. I met in Chicago my partner currently, my better half. And we moved to Baltimore, and I was into my second year of PhD there. And I got effectively just opportunistically,
A job offer.
headhunted.
Okay,
Headhunted
yep.
into Trinity College Dublin in Ireland.
Ah,
through the
and
network
henceforth
of
comes
different.
the
So
Irish economy
in
expert
year
part.
2000, we moved,
Oh,
to
fun.
Ireland for a couple of years.
When times are hopping, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was great. Absolutely, it was right peak of the kind of second wave of the Celtic Tiger, before it became what I call Celtic Garfield. Afterwards, it was boom time. It was .com boom and everything. And we moved for a couple of years. 16 years later, 2 kids, a dog, houses, and everything else. Irish citizenship and everything. We kind of came back in 2016 I was in business a little bit for a while there in Europe, and then I sold out of business there and decided to go back to academia. So we moved to California,
Yep.
back to where I started from in the United States. And I spent 4 years there in Monterey.
Oh,
And then,
not
of
a, not a
course,
terrible spot to
no, great place.
live.
Absolutely love it. Still go back there all of the time. A lot of friends. Fantastic place. Pandemic hit. I lost my job, and I was on the market. So,
Did that land you here
Northern
in
Colorado
UNC?
gave me
Okay.
an offer.
All
I
right.
couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
So we moved here. So it's very interesting because I mean
Yeah.
I became over the 1990s period in particular a mountain goat. So I love
Oh.
climbing. I love being up in the mountains. I
like
love
it.
hiking. I love fly fishing.
Yeah.
I love foraging. So even though we lived on the coasts in California and in Ireland, our house in Ireland is literally on the seafront, and I always kind of drawn to the mountains. And my wife comes, her family comes from northern Italy. We have
Okay.
a house in the Alps there.
All right.
So moving here was for me a very natural move.
Yeah.
I'm kind of maximizing that. I mean,
Awesome.
we spend the entire winter fly fishing because you can't do it in California because they have seasons.
Oh, really?
Here you can go, any river, as long as it's
anytime there's open water.
Exactly, you have a little bit of an open water, you can fly fish. We spend all of the winter, up in the mountains as well. So I'm pretty much every week, up
So you're
there.
happy.
I am happy. I'm happy in a different way as well in terms of my life as well. When you grow older, you kind of discover things that more matter, that are more important. They become usually slower things. And for me, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah,
I'm kind
yeah,
of, decided that all of the media, I've done that. Not interested that much anymore. Public engagements, don't really need them either that much. Being able to do quietly research without the rat race that a lot of universities engage in.
Yeah.
One of the things,
The pressure to
advantages of
publish
being,
and all these things.
well, we have, of course, but the pressure. Say one of the best part of UNC, from my point of view, is that I can do my research there.
Yeah.
No one tells me which areas I should be specialized in. Go into the likes of, say, CU Boulder. You are forced to actually be specialist in a very narrow area. You need to pursue publishing to the point, not just publish or perish, but publish in the top 10
Yeah.
journals in a discipline.
And come up with the conclusions that are in line with our general philosophies too.
Correct, exactly that.
Don't dare
Yes,
expose a
exactly
flaw in
that,
our thought.
yes. So in my world now, I have the luxury of basically saying, I'm interested in this.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay. And to give you an example, I have a co-author, for example, who comes with an interesting data set, quite recently and says, let's do that, but the data set on Indonesian banks. Fine.
Sure.
I can do that. Exactly. And my colleagues would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And, in terms of my job appraisal and everything else, it counts as much,
Yeah.
And there's a luxury to that, of course,
Well, and I think it seems to me anyway that the Monfort College of Business is really an interesting opportunity. It's fairly well funded and supported. They're savvy. They've recruited a bunch of smart people into the program, and not just as an economist, but you've been in business at least a couple different times as well, and so you kind of appreciate not just the academic instinct
Of
of
course.
your field, but actually putting the rubber to the road.
Of course, and we do that, and that's very important as well. So, I mean, like one of the very big things, and I have an 18-year-old who's going to college right now,
Yeah.
and the decision making is in the local colleges. So we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
kind of 3 right now. Cost is very important, of course, consideration, because I mean,
Don't want to be
on
strapped down with a
professorial
bunch of debt,
salary,
yeah.
you don't really exactly. I'm actually not a person who likes that. I mentioned organic before. Yes, organic growth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of funding things from the cash flow you generate. So I don't want him to graduate with any debt at all.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a tug of war because he, of course, doesn't understand that yet. I mean, hey, we've all been there, and when you look back and you say, oh, my mom did say that. Yeah, that's true. I should have listened, We all are like that, but we learn from our own bruises and
I have
mistakes.
some advice from my own background. My dad started a farm. He was a motorcycle mechanic going back to 14 years old, and then he started farming evenings and weekends for 14 years or something. He farmed evenings and weekends, but eventually the farm was working about the time I was going to college. And Dad said, "Well, son, the farm's doing good enough now. We could help you with your schooling a little bit, but I think you get a lot more out of it if you pay for it yourself."
And that's amazing. Yes,
He was right.
I mean, at the time, I bet you were going like, "What the?"
He was
No.
right. I mean, everybody I knew that flunked out,
Yeah,
their parents were paying for it.
yeah.
So have him
yeah,
be in for at least
exactly.
a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, like we learn
Skin in the
different, of course,
game.
things. So yeah, I mean, but when you think about one of the advantages that of the UNC and Monfort College in particular is that we are actually laser focused on the idea that all of the people going through the program in business, it doesn't matter whether you're studying marketing, you're studying management, you're studying finance, okay, will have a full portfolio of internships. And those internships can be structured insofar as they can be repeated over the period
Yep.
of time. We want to place
Or
you
let
in
you
a good
sample a little bit,
quality.
a few different
So
things.
even like people like myself, we are running around all of the time trying to find new opportunities for internships.
Cool.
Okay, so for example, I was talking to a big healthcare provider
Yep.
in an area here now in the state of Colorado, who is going to come on board with offering internships for
nice,
our students.
nice.
Pretty awesome. There's sometimes you get students who want to do international as well. You try to find for them opportunities international. Challenging out of greedy, but nonetheless, that's our job. We
Yeah,
want
yeah.
to do that. So everything we teach has to be aligned, not just we don't, unlike other universities, unlike what we call R1 level universities, research focused universities,
yeah.
we're not training kids to go, or kids or young adults, to go into a PhD program down the road.
Yeah.
We don't disadvantage them in that sense as well. We give them the ABCs, but if they want to do a PhD, they probably should either look at different university or look at a career path to PhD. So in other words, you graduate, you
Yeah.
go to the
Find an employer
through the
that'll
career.
help you pay for your PhD.
Exactly. But also who will give you a frame for what you want to study. Because,
Yeah.
of course, the PhD by itself
Yeah, where
shouldn't
do I
be a
point
goal.
it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, we are much more applied. Our view is, and we constantly do that. I've served, for example, on a curriculum committee. I'm on a graduate committee nowadays as well. We're constantly looking at it from the point of view of opportunities. I had international affairs for the MCB, and part of my job is explicitly, even when we talk about the exchanges for the faculty, international exchanges, we always condition them as to what's the benefit for students?
Yeah.
What doors does it open for students? What opportunities it opens for students? Okay, we're trying to structure the programs where we bring students out. We try to support them. We have scholarships for that. Not only we have scholarships, unlike other universities where you have the student body, some of which can afford additional 2, 3, 5,000 for a trip abroad to study. We actually structure it on the basis there should be no additional cost for students
Wow.
compared to what they actually incur in their normal semester.
That's cool.
So most of our programs are like that. And, since I joined, we had this big debate with the International Affairs Office, for example, who wanted to structure more of the traditional study abroad education opportunities where you go for a semester and it is a third party provider and
Yeah,
they
and you
actually
screw around
hold your
and
hand
whatever.
and
Yeah.
everything else. No, it's a serious programs, don't take me wrong. I mean, they're
Gotcha.
great as well, but they're much costlier. So
Sure.
we kind of managed to restore that balance. We
Cool.
want our students to go irrespective of their income, irrespective of their financial opportunities. And we want them to do that because it opens doors,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
opens different horizons, because the companies, internationally trading companies, even based in Colorado, will look at your CV or your resume when you are graduating from college, and they will try to identify those students who have that experience, who have that exposure to international dimension in their classroom and so forth. So,
Cool.
yeah, absolutely we do.
If there's somebody listening and they might have internships available for their medium-sized business out there in the Northern Front Range, can they just stalk you on LinkedIn or something like that?
Absolutely,
Okay.
any channel. I mean, first of all, you can bloody Google me, okay? And you can get my email. If it's private email, use it whichever way. If you see me at any event, stop me. We are looking for that,
Call me
and
at the
it's not
office.
just.
Yeah.
Don't call me at the office because I don't answer phone in the office. But call me on my cell phone. Call me in any way, shape, or form. Okay.
Sounds good.
And it also applies to other colleagues of mine. You can reach out to anyone. If you go on MCB's website,
Okay.
you have all of us with our email addresses. Email any of us, and it will be the same support as well. We want to see that more. We will, in fact, actually, in other programs, in other universities, you would have probably an administrator dealing with you if you want an intern. If you reach out to somebody like myself and you say, I'm looking for this skill set, an intern, I will reach out to my faculty.
You know the
and I will
23 people
go
that are
through,
looking,
well,
or
not
whatever.
200 people, okay?
200
Like
people
say,
are looking.
400 people. We have in finance, we have about 200 plus
Wow.
students.
Okay.
But we know them because
Right.
there's about, say 10 of us who are teaching them. And I can email all 10 of us and somebody will come up with a list of different students. We can discuss them and we can then offer them as your interns. That's the level of work we do.
Fair enough.
And it's totally normal from our point of view and it's totally expected from our point of view. Because when somebody says that we are student-centric, everyone says that, okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually genuinely have to be student-centric.
Yeah.
Because we have to compete with the bigger universities and better funded universities. And there's a lot of competition in
Yeah.
the Northern Colorado territory,
Yeah.
of course. We also have to work with students which come from so many different diverse backgrounds who
Yeah.
are interested in so many things.
Yeah. Yeah. I imagine some of your students are they're a first time college student in their whole
Yes.
family and they're coming from Kansas or
Over
from
40%.
Sterling.
Yeah.
And it's a stretch for them to afford the tuition that UNC charges.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the other ones are like, it's half as much as CSU, so I'm going to go there instead because it seems just
Absolutely.
as good. Or it's too big. CSU is scary and big, and I would rather just go to a school where I'm going to know
There's
my
a lot of
professors.
legacy things. There's a lot of pull into UNC from students who know somebody who graduated, maybe not in their family, but in their neighborhood, in
Yeah,
their
yeah.
area as well. That's one of the things. There's another attractor as well. So at UNC, in our school, in MCB in particular, we expect our students to be full-time working.
Oh.
So we accommodate them.
Oh, is that
We
right?
don't require them, but we
Right.
expect them. We
Most
know
of them
that a
have
lot of
part-time
them will
jobs
be.
at least, yeah.
Well, all of them will have part-time jobs, guaranteed. Okay, most of them have more than part-time job in a traditional way. It's more than
Wow.
half load. So as a result of that, we try to accommodate them as much as possible. So one of the things we did, and that came in force this year, and it's continuing rolling out as well. We have switched from the 5-day teaching to 4-day teaching.
Oh.
So we now have Monday.
extra full
You take Monday, Wednesday in person, or Tuesday, Thursday in person, and then Friday is remote. So it's down to myself and my students to decide how we want to work that day. I usually just post some material for them. I'm available if they want to reach out, and we can have one-on-one.
Sure.
We can have with a group meeting.
It's kind of your research time and different things like that,
No,
too.
not really. It's still a student time. 100% it's student time. So I'm available to them. It's just that when we work together, we work, say, for example, on a project. Okay. So again, hands-on experiential learning is facilitated through it. But if you are working, or if you have to commute back home for the weekend and so forth, you can do it.
Yeah, yeah.
So we try to accommodate as much as possible those type of flexibilities. We're offering now a completion degree online, which you can finish degrees online as well.
Oh,
So there's a lot of different modalities,
yeah,
okay?
yeah, yeah.
And it is successful for us, okay? So one of our most successful programs in the MBA, for example, and our MBA is fully online, fully remote, right? There's no requirement for synchronous, but again, we have the flexibility.
Do I
So
get to know my fellow MBA students or anything?
it's up to
Is there
you.
projects?
There
Okay.
are, yes, 100%. So my class, so I'm teaching one class now. I'm going to teach two classes in the program starting in the fall. My classes all require group work. I also hold not synchronous, but kind of preset hours. So once a week, I have 2 hours where I'm available. Anyone can come in on Zoom at any moment in time during those 2 hours. They can come in to discuss the questions. They can come in to discuss life.
Yeah, yeah.
Quite often, actually, that happens more than even technical
Yeah.
questions in finance. And it's an opportunity also for students to talk between themselves.
Sure.
So even though they're physically separated, of course, and they can be anywhere located, and a lot of them are located in different states as well.
Sure.
And even in the Colorado, they're distributed as well. There's somebody who is up in the mountains, somebody who is in the western Colorado. You have an ability to have a forum.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yes, I mean, the answer is we would like to have much more community. We would like to have much more building of a traditional interaction between the
Yep,
students,
yep.
networks, and so forth. We are working on it. We have created, for example, a student advisory body. So there's an alumni body which is advising us, which is pretty large. It started with, I think, originally 5 people. This is the second year that it is in existence, and I think it's now about 20.
Oh, wow.
Of course, there's alumni network, which is kind of formal and traditional network.
Sure.
But that's kind of managed out
Yeah,
of the
these people
university.
are giving their time
Oh,
directly.
yes, absolutely. And this event is now we're going to have, I think, the second event where it's coming up. We're going to have in Denver a meeting, and we're trying to scale that up as well. So, going
Find
down
more
the
of
road.
those past graduates, whatever.
Yeah, so you're
and
gonna
hook them
have
up to
like
jobs in
probably
every region and stuff
ultimately every couple of months we would have a networking event. That's the hope that
yeah.
we're heading and towards, and the networking event in the bigger areas like Denver metro, like say for example Boulder again,
Yeah, yeah.
and so forth. So yeah,
Very cool. My alma mater is North Dakota State,
okay, yep.
which back in those days was a rival with UNC in Division II football.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they traded titles a few times back 20 years ago.
I don't know if they are still. I honestly don't know.
North Dakota State moved up a level.
Okay,
So
all
they're
right.
Division One FCS now. And
Okay.
I think they've won like 12 out of the last 15 championships.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all
Yeah,
right.
they're
Okay.
ballers.
See, I'm pretty ignorant about those sports because
Yeah.
none of my kids are in
What
them.
we call
so.
football isn't football around here.
Yes, yeah, but no, look, I mean, it's fine, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
it's local, I mean, there is also like if you think about different levels and types of football, and we think about soccer versus American football, I'm starting to think about, say, Irish football, yes, and then Australian rules as well, and all of a sudden you kind of get into
that
completely,
one.
yeah, exactly, which looks totally different, yes. I mean, it isn't rugby, it isn't football, but it is something like football.
It
Yes,
is. It's true. I want to take a quick break,
yeah,
potty break,
okay.
and then we'll come back and I want to talk a little bit about the kind of risks in the world. What can we look forward to in the next 6 to 12 months, both economically but also conflict risks.
All right,
Yeah, fun.
cool, okay.
Hi, this is Clint Jasperson, Managing Partner at Purpose Driven Wealth. We believe financial clarity leads to a life of contentment and purpose. Our mission is to guide clients through the complexities of wealth management, retirement planning, and legacy using a values-driven, stewardship-based approach focused on provision, contentment, and enjoyment. With more than a century of expertise through Thrivent, we offer tailored strategies to help individuals and families achieve their goals and embrace generosity. Whether you're navigating a life or business transition or planning for the future, we're here to partner with you every step of the way. To learn more about Purpose-Driven Wealth, call 970-330-7411.
And we're back. So one of the reasons I first reached out back a few months ago was I thought with your name you might be kind of an expert on the Russia-Ukraine region and insights about, is it really about the rare earths? Is it really about NATO? Is it really about poking the bear until the bear had to claw back? What
All
are
of these things, yes. I
right?
mean,
It's
you
complicated.
don't poke the bear for no reason, yes. I mean, there is a bear there, you know. If you're hiking through the mountains, don't poke the bear, no matter what the reason
Yeah.
is. But you know, in the way it's kind of is the allegory, yes. Don't poke the bear. There is a history, yes. There's a
Yeah.
long-term history. There's issues. Russia sees itself, for whether it's right or wrong, as a, you know, not necessarily a superpower, but perhaps a power to be reckoned with.
Yeah, somebody to be respected.
Correct.
At least.
And it regained that respect by, you know, hard effort, not always the most constructive effort, but nonetheless, from the Russian perspective, it is constructive effort.
Yeah,
It's a very
yeah.
important effort as well. It's a geopolitical power which kind of sees, you know, kind of similar to America in that sense that it sees itself as a messenger, as as the dominant player in the region, if not globally. So poking the bear was ill-advised.
Like the acceptance of Lithuania and all these.
No, not so much. Actually,
was
no, this
okay.
is a very interesting thing about this. You know, we first originally, when the process of the breakdown of the Warsaw Pact, yes,
Yeah.
and a kind of Soviet empire started, we actually overestimated the extent of sensitivities that was involved. From Russian perspective, the Baltic states were never naturally a part of Russia.
They were more like Finland or whatever.
Exactly, bingo. And Finland is a great example. Yes, Finland was incorporated into Russia as a basically fully autonomous entity with its own parliament, with its own government, with its own rules, laws, and everything
In
else.
the Soviet.
No, that was
after.
before. No,
Okay.
that was way before in the Russian
Okay,
Empire.
okay.
Yes.
Yep.
So when when the Russian Empire itself dissolved, when the Tsar abdicated, it dissolved the connection because the Tsar was never the Tsar of Finland.
Right.
He was basically Archduke of Finland.
Yeah.
So in a way, Tsar disappearing, there was no other connection between Finland
Nobody
and
else
Russia.
kind of came into that agreement,
Correct.
if you will.
So there was no basis.
We've got
for
a student
agreement.
with us from Finland right now. My wife and I are hosting an exchange student.
That's awesome.
So I've learned a fair bit.
Like, you know, exactly. And it's an amazing nation, by the way.
Yeah.
The history of it is amazing. The ability of that, you know, society and that culture to survive next to this giant, you know,
Right.
Russia, with a history of and also, by the way, being wedged between Russia and Sweden. Sweden has
Yeah, they were
had,
assholes too for a long time.
Well, they had their aspirations, okay?
Yeah.
And,
Hey, aspirations is a nicer
and
way of
so,
saying that.
And so did, of course, Poles, yes?
Sure.
And Polish-Lithuanian kingdom and all. So that whole neck of the woods had been very much contested, of course, over the centuries as well. But apart from the history itself, and the history does inform who we are,
Sure.
beyond any doubts, there is a lot of kind of insecurity in Russia as well. NATO presents that insecurity and presents that pressure. You know, Ukraine conflict really started way before 2014 even, okay? There was a constant pressure and pull within Ukraine, which in modern Ukraine is the Soviet creation, yes?
Sure.
It bolted on the Western Ukraine, which was never really a part of the old traditional Ukraine
Oh, okay.
or the Eastern Ukraine. And this kind of dichotomy, the difference, yes, creates a very tremendous, you know, force of
Kind of like a
polarization.
north versus south element like in the U.S.
Less
almost,
so,
where
but more like, say, North versus, you know, Republic of Ireland.
Gotcha.
Okay, like the, say, Protestants and Catholics.
Yeah, more
and
like
you
that.
have the religious difference as well.
Yeah.
There, you have a Catholic Western Ukraine, and you have the Orthodox Eastern Ukraine.
Oh,
of
yeah.
course. And then you have also other minorities as well. There, yes, you
Yeah,
have the
well, probably a lot
Muslim
of
minority.
non-religious Western Ukraine then too.
Probably,
or
actually,
Catholic identifying, but not too
neither
active.
one. You know, that's more like central Ukraine, which is
Okay.
administrative Ukraine, like Dnipro area, all
Okay.
the way to Kiev, non-secular. Okay, much more kind of modernized,
Yep,
much
yep.
more, you know, industrialized
or
and so
whatever,
forth.
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, this is all, of course, very much, you know, we are skirting on the side of much more complexity
Sure.
than this. Okay, so
trying to do it
when
in 7
those,
minutes here or
so
something,
yeah, no, it's true. Oh, good luck. I mean,
Or 12. Maybe we got
yeah.
15.
I'm the wrong person for that question. Yeah, you know. So there is a lot of history there, and then history goes back. There's some good things, there are some bad things between it, of course. So yes, the West has played a less than smart role in the process. That doesn't absolve Russia.
Sure.
Exactly, absolutely. It played less constructive role. rather than, like the West played
I
not
was
a smart
terrified
one.
when Biden shot the long range missiles into Russia after losing the election. I was like, "What are you doing?" Like, I'm not sure that was
Allowing that, yes, but on the other hand, of course, if you take the position from the point of view of supporting Ukraine, and
right.
that is intellectually
This is what they
valid
need.
position,
Yep.
they need more than that.
Right.
And where
For
do
sure.
you stop? And that's the whole problem, yes?
Right.
So, in a way, I'm actually in line with Trump administration on the fact that that war should never have been started,
Yeah.
100%. The problem is that the wishful thinking doesn't work forward, yes?
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
and the argument I hear about, giving Russia a piece of eastern Ukraine and having an agreement that's signed and forces done and stuff is that, after Trump is gone, next crappy president we've got in the office, Russia's going to take Ukraine and then they're going to take Poland and then they're going to take the rest of it.
I don't think that Russia will take Poland.
I don't think they will
I don't
either.
think Russia has any ambition in terms of the additional territory gains. I don't think it wanted Eastern Ukraine either to begin with.
But now you had a
But it
bunch
is.
of people
But
dead.
it now
so,
has Eastern
right.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
I would be of the view that, from my point of view, Ukraine is an independent nation,
Mm-hmm.
and sovereign states should not be attacked. They, no matter what, if they do attack, then defense is justifiable.
okay.
But non-defensive war is not justifiable. But this is my personal views.
Sure.
Yes, we are, as they say, where we are, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
a big problem, because how do you resolve? How do you get out of here? The difficulty we have is less logistics of the who controls the ground, but more of the logistics who has the trust. Nobody has the trust. We
Yeah.
don't trust the Russians. Russians don't trust us.
Yep.
Ukrainians don't trust the Russians. We don't trust
And
Ukrainians.
nobody trusts Ukraine. Yeah.
Yeah, even
Except
Poland.
for the Europeans seem to
Even
trust
Poland,
Ukraine.
no, I mean, even Europeans.
yeah.
Europeans say that they trust Ukraine, but to be
Right.
honest, do you really think that the French trust Ukraine, or for that matter, French trust anyone but the French? Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at for example, Italians, and you look at Meloni,
Sure.
she comes in from the point of view into the political realm
Right.
today.
She's
and
the
leadership.
MAGA of
She's worse
Europe.
than MAGA. Yes, I mean, like it was before MAGA got accused of being fascist. She was accused of being fascist. Yes, and now she's one of the leaders of the kind of freedom movement.
Well, and France would have that leader too, potentially,
Yeah.
except for the funny
That's
business
right.
they pulled with the election.
That's right. So I mean, and Germany too, and
Right,
I mean, if you
right.
go everywhere, the only countries like Ireland are the ones which are saying we don't have the right wing, but then you have the Conor
The super
McGregor.
communists.
I mean, so I mean, there is the paradox of that is that we're in an extremely complex environment. We're not in the environment where we deal with risk. If you use the proper terminology, we deal with what in the 1990s U.S. military, the U.S. Army has labeled VUCA. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that is an environment where things don't just happen as kind of unpleasant events. What happens in these environments is systemic crisis, big things, big wars, not just small skirmish, not some kind of stable, relatively balanced conflict that happened in 2014
Yeah.
in eastern Ukraine, but actually full-out wars, and that's 2022.
Yeah.
So from this point of view, even devising any sort of the response has to start with the proposition, what's the worst case scenario that you're
Yeah.
going to get? And up until 2022, we had the worst case scenario is we're going to have a lot of people dead. Now we have the worst case scenario of the nuclear
Everybody's
world war.
dead. Yeah.
Effectively, everybody's dead. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you go historically, who normalized that reality? It wasn't the Russians. It was actually the first idea of the winnable nuclear conflict, so-called limited nuclear conflict, came out in the United States, and it was codified in early noughties by the likes of the Atlantic Council or the Council of Foreign Relations, okay, in the United States. The advisors to our policymakers, the advisors to our national security heads in Congress, in the White House, and everywhere else.
Yeah.
So in a way, we are.
Now, is that because of the pressure of profit from because you sell
Is it military-industrial
bombs and
complex?
Yeah,
That's a very interesting thing. So military-industrial complex, I did some research on military-industrial complex, and part of kind of, there is very surprisingly, for the size of the military-industrial complex, if you go into finance and economics literature, there aren't a lot of papers. Nobody
Not a lot
really
of direct
studies
evidence
them.
of,
No, it's not that. It's just nobody
not a
really
popular
studies them.
subject. Yeah.
It's not a popular
It's like
subject.
studying the
So
COVID
when we wrote,
vaccine.
when I had myself and a couple of my graduate students back, I think around 2013, started research on that, and it took me until 2023 to publish the first paper on this.
Okay.
Because nobody wanted to take it. Journals are not interested.
And
You
what's
know,
the punchline, if I may?
so the punchline is the following: the military-industrial complex doesn't make money out of the direct immediate wars.
Yeah.
What they make money out of the two things. One is kind of pipeline of ordering, the budgets.
Yep.
Okay, so the budgets of war are more important than the wars themselves. And the second thing, when things become really uncertain, when things not just blow up, okay, but they blow up in an unpredictable way. So again, it's not the
Yeah.
risk, okay. So there's two things that investors in military-industrial complex like. They like the steady pipeline of orders that they can program into the future, and that's
Yep.
something
Just
we
keep making this
deliver.
many parts. Yep.
So that's our regular budget. But the wars themselves, the spikes, the moments of this acceleration in the uncertainty about the future demand, always kind of leads to the promotion or the support of the military-industrial complex stocks. So in a way, you can see now
Oh, and they just
why
like
we
to see their stock price go up.
we
Yeah.
constantly need this kind of drive towards being belligerent,
Yeah.
bellicose. United States is, in a way, Jimmy Carter was correct in saying that in its history, this is probably the most warring nation on the face of
Probably.
Earth. You know,
Yeah.
Even though we haven't fought really a war on our own soil
Right.
for quite a long time.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, blessed we are by that, but we have supported, whether directly or indirectly, vast numbers of conflicts.
Yeah.
It is, unfortunately, it is the geopolitical reality today,
Yeah.
and we're going to see more of it.
I think one of the biggest risk points of this, and like seeing Chinese and North Korean troops joining the Russians on the fronts and stuff like that, is like that's the last
Not
thing
so
we
much
really
Chinese.
want.
Chinese are staying cool on that. They
Okay.
don't,
Not yet.
there's some argument, there's some, kind of reporting coming out of Ukraine that they have traced some Chinese conscripts,
Okay.
not conscripts, but the contract soldiers.
Yeah.
But that's not the
Not a
state-supported
significant-
thing.
okay.
Yeah, North Korea is a different story. So
Sure.
Russia has signed, basically a common defense clause with North Korea.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
That happened in 2023.
Okay.
As a result of that,
Yeah,
Russia
a
actually
win for North
can-
Korea, because they're like, hey,
Huge
this'll
win for
keep,
North Korea. Absolutely.
keep
Huge
these jerks.
win for North
And plus,
Korea.
a great export for, like, they got a bunch of starving men in North Korea.
do.
Like, better to get a nice paycheck
They do.
sent to the homeland.
The numbers of them are limited. I mean,
Yeah.
you're talking about 5 to 10,000
Oh,
as
is that
far as
all?
we have the credible
Actually trained.
information.
Yeah.
That actually went in. All of them, as far as I understand, have stayed within Russia proper. So it's the Kursk region
Okay.
where Ukraine had the counteroffensive, remember?
Yep.
That's where they fought. They haven't crossed, as far as I know, into the Ukrainian territory.
Yeah.
Which, of course, would be, kind of probably an act of war against Ukraine by North Korea.
Right.
It's very hard to even trace what exactly is the act of war these days. Okay, How far we moved. Back in the days, it used to be you send a very stern letter to the leader of the other country,
Right. Oh,
and then
that's-
you send, a knight, with a bill of, where you ask for
Right.
things and demand the things, and then there's,
Yeah,
kind
like
of
the
the
Bugs
act of
Bunny
war.
thing, a little slap with a
Thereafter,
glove.
exactly. And bingo, exactly. It used to be like, and you go back to the 19th century in the history of warfare, then, I mean, you have the first event of the so-called barbaric or modern war happens in 1812 in Russia. Napoleon's campaign in Russia. And it was the first time when they encountered the concerted resistance, organized resistance by the non-combatants, the partisans, the locals, the peasants with pitchforks.
Yeah.
It shocked Europeans, yes?
Yeah.
It shocked the refined
Because we
European...
have professional armies.
Yes, and we fight
wouldn't
army
resort
to
to
army.
that.
We
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
touch the peasants, yes?
Right.
I mean, and here's the peasants touching you.
Right.
So that changed the modern warfare, yes? And since then, we have kind of evolved.
Well,
to
and
the
even
point-
the Revolutionary War with the Americans, where the British are like, we line up and then we
Yes,
stand this
that's
far
right.
apart
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
shoot each
yeah,
other,
yeah,
and you guys are hiding
yeah.
behind trees and shit. Like that's not
right.
fair.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, like and that kind of noble structure of the campaigns and military campaigns has disintegrated over a period
Yeah,
of years.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, so we now today are in a war environment where it is you have the non-human actors
Yeah,
involved,
yeah. Oh, the drones and stuff.
not only drones, robots.
Sure.
We effectively turn the war field or the battlefield into the constant testing lab for new technologies. It's happening on the Western side and on the Russian side as well. So in this environment, to kind of go around and kind of scream about the North Koreans, I mean, it's almost like,
Yeah, not that significant compared to
yeah,
all the rest that's going on.
exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
and if you start thinking about the drone technology, like, can we keep up now? You know?
Very interesting question. So, I mean, Russia has managed to, and this goes to my profession and kind of my field of expertise as well. We were all taken completely unprepared by the ability of the Russian economy to switch to the kind of military-industrial complex. Russia had really not a meaningful military budget and
Yeah,
expenditure
yeah.
before the war. It has retooled its economy very successfully. It has managed the ways to bypass tremendous sanctions, which have never been deployed in the history against any other country in the past.
Yeah.
It
To the
has,
point where it almost, like, to me, was a risk of devaluation of the dollar. Like, if you can just take
they're not
somebody's
driving,
money, right?
so they're not driving the devaluation of the dollar themselves.
No, but
There's
the
more-
risk of another currency replacing the dollar, BRICS or
Yes,
something,
correct,
because
yes, yeah,
we
yeah.
just took a
We've
few
we've
billion
started-
dollars,
We've started that process, and what we call that, in my profession, we call it weaponization of economic systems.
Yep.
They can be financial systems, they can be trade systems. The United States, over the last, say, and it's really started with the late 1990s onwards. Okay,
like Iran sanctions
the
and stuff.
very big move was, of course, the Second Gulf War.
Sure.
And thereafter, it's accelerated tremendously. By now, we have weaponized absolutely everything we have. We have weaponized aid. We have weaponized humanitarian assistance. We have weaponized health provision. Anything that is outward looking in the United States, from our Treasury Department to our health, again, to our food supplies, is all weaponized. When you do that, you create incentives, both push and pull incentives, for the nefarious or adversarial actors, whether they are Russia, Ukraine, Ukraine, China, but even Ukraine, Poland as well. They're not adversarial, but they're competitive in many ways,
right.
okay, as well. All of these different players have used, to some extent, the United States weaponizing its systems to resist that. Yes.
Yeah.
So the idea of, say, for example, de-dollarization of the economy, global economy, we think of it as the kind of, juxtaposition between Russia plus China and maybe other BRICS
Right.
against the United States. The biggest challenger to the US dollar in the last 25 years has not been yuan or
Gold.
ruble or gold. It was euro.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So when you think about it, are Europeans our allies?
Well,
But we create an opportunity for them to
Right.
effectively benefit from what we benefited for decades of the, post-Bretton Woods structure of the
Sure.
economy and Bretton Woods structure of the economy.
yeah.
Yes?
Well, maybe they can carry that
So-
torch for a while and be the
There is a
policeman
great
of the world.
advantage to it, but there is
Yeah.
also a huge burden to that.
Sure.
Yes, you mentioned being policeman to the rest of the world, which creates a draw on our own resources.
Yeah.
Yes,
We're
at
almost
certain
obligated
points
to
in
that 'cause
times
we're the ones
we
that can print
invest
money.
more in the global, if you want, security than we invest in the roads and railroads in the country.
Sure.
We certainly invest more in Pentagon, which is an outward projection of our power, than we invest in healthcare in this country.
Sure.
So, I mean, yeah, there's a burden to that.
Malinvestment.
Huge burden, massive burden.
Yeah.
So, yes, there are benefits to having this dominant hegemonic position in the global economy, but also in military, industrial space.
It's a heavy yoke to
But
bear.
there is also
kinda.
correct, yeah. There is
Yeah.
there is also a cost. There is no free lunch. Yes. So in a way, the challenge that we're witnessing today to the U.S. economy, U.S. dollar, U.S. hegemony, is so multidimensional. It's very different from the Cold War challenge when you had a literally juxtaposition of two superpowers.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
And there was more tension to that.
Sure.
But the change was...
We'd see magazines all the time comparing the size of our
Yeah,
nuclear stockpiles
exactly.
and stuff,
Correct,
right?
yes. That's where we got at, but the tension was almost one-dimensional. Now it is so multidimensional that you have the challenges to the United States. I'll give you an example.
The predictability
tariffs.
is real hard.
Take tariffs. Yes, the tariffs have triggered the reaction between, and kind of, if you want, trade war. Of course, yes, tit for tat between China and the United States. But behind the scenes, I think it was yesterday, there was a conversation happening in Beijing about the need, and they are projecting that, it's a public, projection of that conversation, of course, that we get on our end, about the need to have a closer relationship in terms of investments flows, in terms of trade, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of all cultural links between China and Vietnam. Vietnam has drifted towards the United States orbit far enough that it is now an alert from the Chinese point of view, and the Chinese are going to deploy whatever soft diplomacy they usually deploy, which is usually involves investment and trade, but also cultural exchanges, also educational opportunities.
Well, and because Vietnam was one of the first countries to respond and be like, we're in, we're talking.
Absolutely, yes. So there's a very interesting, this type of challenges back in the Cold War era would be happening way before the actual confrontation takes place, and they would be much more stable.
Right.
Now they're multidimensional.
The president would send emissaries 4 months before a deal was
of
made
course,
and stuff, instead of Trump just going,
and
we're going to text the shit
and once
out of
they
those
are
guys
in
tomorrow.
our orbit, we can rely on them being in our orbit. With exception of course, non-aligned states like, say, India, which always kind of treaded both dimensions, but by and large there was either my camp and your camp. Now there is my camp in one thing, your camp in another thing, and I'm playing an independent one for now, in a third thing.
Well, and the Europe is really a hard thing to figure out. How does that fit in?
That's another. Spanish,
Russia,
for example,
Ukraine,
foreign minister today coming out with a statement that he believes that Europe should be in alignment, with a close alignment with China.
Oh. Yeah.
So, I mean, here we have the president of the United States who is trying to, kind of both country China. But I mean, at the same time, some people say that he's building the, alliances between the, or he's incentivizing the Europeans to kind of join the United States in opposition to China. How's, taking over Greenland and, screwing Denmark fits into that? I'm not sure,
Well, is it really screwing Denmark, though? Or would it be a burden lifted from them that we would gladly carry?
So far, they are not giving us indication that it would be a
No, they
burden
don't
lifted
talk like
off
that.
them.
But when I look at it from a big picture, it
yeah.
almost like they have to send a bunch of money to Greenland every year. It's like
it's kind of,
some...
Vladimir Putin probably has made an argument at a certain point in time that lifting off the eastern Ukraine from the rest of Ukraine would lift the burden from
Yeah, you don't want to have to
Lviv,
finance that.
Or
Fair.
Vinnytsia,
Fair.
But yeah, I mean, no, I don't think so. I think, I think the notion that President Trump is playing some sort of a 7-dimensional chess game here is a little bit straight ahead of,
More,
both President Trump is...
He saw a projection map and saw how big Greenland was.
Yeah,
He had to have it.
I
It's
know,
bigger
but
than Texas.
There's beyond that, of course, he's clearly is a president who is driven by the desire to be put in the textbooks.
Sure.
In history
Yeah,
textbooks. And what biggest thing you can do other than add territory on a major scale? There's other things. I mean, the whole, north, the Arctic Ocean, the access to the Arctic Ocean.
Sure.
United States only has that through a small part of Alaska. We can't really be players in the Arctic with just that. Canada is clearly kind of, very hesitant as well. So you have this, there is incentives, of course. But I mean, would you go about it by the way you've got his gun?
No.
I mean, you're certainly not attracting Canada to join the United States.
No,
I know.
Do you think Canada should be a state or 10 smaller states?
That's a question which I think is so esoteric at this stage. I think the United States needs a North American customs and labor market union.
Yeah.
We need to have the relationship with our neighbors that are, again, cooperative and constructive to the point of being similar to the European Union.
That would be...
Free mobility of labor. You can preserve identity. You can preserve... I mean, look, Canada has multiple identities itself.
Sure.
Yes, Quebec versus,
Oh, yeah.
the rest. British Columbia versus the rest.
Well, and all the Midwestern ones, right? They're
Yeah.
basically North Dakotans,
Well, I
in
mean,
Saskatchewan and Manitoba and stuff.
Yeah, they might
used
actually
to
say
be.
that it's North Dakotans now, but so exactly. So you can have that. We have tremendous diversity within the United States, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
as well. We have the South, we have Florida, which is different from the South.
Sure.
I mean, you can narrate different.
Why is Canada so focused on carbon credits and preventing global warming when it's so cold up there? Wouldn't they benefit from a little warm up
This is
over
interesting.
time?
In economics, there is a kind of subfield of environmental economics, which looks
yeah.
at that, at kind of, what are the rebalancing effects.
They could raise
yes?
corn up there instead of just wheat.
And interestingly enough, so a former student of mine took his first job, years ago, working for a big family office in Europe. And one of the deals that he was working on structuring was the purchase of a large chunk of permafrost land in northern Canada.
Okay.
And the premise was that it will turn at a certain point in time into
Yeah.
agriable land.
In 100 years, this will be farmland.
I mean, you can see, for example, like say, winemakers in Southern
Sure.
California moving farther and farther north.
Yeah,
yes?
yeah.
We have now wine being made in Canada.
Yeah.
We have wine returning back to the British Isles. So, not since Roman times it was there produced
yeah.
really at scale. So yes, there are of course gains to be had in certain areas. Okay, the problem becomes is that the problems of the South will be imported into the North.
Right.
One of the big drivers is the whole migration, for example. Yes,
Totally.
we have that at scale now starting to happen in the likes of the Middle East, in the likes of parts of Africa as well,
Yeah.
where there is a combination of conflicts,
Plus searing heat.
violence, and then heat, and then impact on soil,
Yeah.
impact on quality of soil, impact on water livability, and so forth. So when you think about this, in the past, we are comfortable with saying, for example, things like energy has driven wars before. There were wars for oil.
Yeah.
We know historically there were wars for salt
Sure.
because of the importance of salt in preserving food, yes,
Sure.
in the past. Why we're having difficulty thinking in terms of the geopolitical crisis
Right.
being driven by mass scale changes in the livability of different parts of the world.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you have to believe in a completely cataclysmic,
Yeah.
apocalyptic type of the environment change, scenario.
So do we have to be more open to changes in sovereignty or boundaries or alliances or unions then?
I think we have to be more open to how we define sovereignty.
Hmm.
Yes. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on your ability to control your own borders. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on the ability of having your own identity. It doesn't mean that you have to give up on trying to chart your own path
Yeah.
that suits your specific culture, your history into the future. But it does mean that we have to be more comfortable with change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fair. I'm going to call a timeout because we've got a couple more segments that are mandatory. And I do want to get Ava
Okay.
out of here in time. So,
All right.
First we have the ping pong ball challenge, and I'm going to have you draw 3 balls out of there, and I'm going to ask you the question from my list that's associated with those balls.
Okay.
You can grab the whole thing over to you if you like.
Let's do that. All right. So
So just grab any 3 numbers out of there, and then you can set that back over.
let's
I'll
see if
take
any
care
of
it.
the numbers actually that
They're all good.
I find lucky. All right. Okay.
So, what's the first number you'd like me to...
I'll start backwards. 1.
Number 1.
Yes, number 1.
Oh,
Exactly.
this is fun. First time this question's been asked, I think. What's your favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory. Probably is a set of memories that form me. Okay. I'm a big fisherman. I like fly fishing.
Okay.
I'm a big forager as well, and I grew up on in the city of Moscow.
Yeah, when you said foraging earlier, I meant to ask, but like for mushrooms and things like
everything.
that? Or...
Edible mushrooms, edible berries,
Okay.
herbs, My last foraging was actually in December back in on the Central Coast in California,
Okay.
and it was porcini that I brought
Oh.
a whole box of back fresh,
Nice.
and I had some herba
This is in Italy
buena.
mostly, or
No, that
sometimes?
was
Okay, right
California.
here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Also in Italy as well, in Alps, we do that as well there.
Yeah.
So I forage pretty much for everything, including for the firewood for my little barbecue pit.
Okay.
So I like barbecuing with a natural wood fire. So I forage for the wood as well.
So that favorite
So
childhood
my
memory.
favorite memory would be my river I grew up on, because I grew
Hmm.
up in Moscow City, and we had a property outside. We still have that property outside of Moscow, and it's a
Hmm. Almost
nice,
like a little
you know,
country home or whatever.
exactly,
like
it
the
is. Yeah, yeah,
Finlanders
it's a
would
summer
have.
house. Yeah,
Yeah,
summer
yeah.
house with a couple of acres of land
Yep.
right on the river, and I grew up there, and I spent that, and so that river is my probably, you
Yeah.
know, kind of most treasured.
Can always call up
memory.
that sound of that
That's
river
right.
almost.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
cool. Thank you.
You can feel it. You can see it. You can smell
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Never leaves quite.
Yeah.
Next question.
Oh yes, 20.
20. What's your go-to excuse when you want to get out of plans with someone?
Other than saying I'm Russian.
I don't make
Okay.
plans.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you don't want to make plans with me. Yeah. What's my favorite excuse when I get out of something? Usually it is a work thing. Yes.
Sorry, just gotta work.
We always, yeah, exactly. There's so much stuff I have to do. You know, I can't go to a concert. That's my wife actually goes like, you know, let's go to a
You can
concert.
take your
I bought these
girlfriend
tickets.
instead.
You know, no, I'm
Take
working.
Susie.
You know? Yeah, that probably would be pretty banal, but usual. Yes.
Fair enough.
I don't like relying on things like, say, health,
Right.
because it's kind of almost like a bad omen.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
So I don't,
fair.
if I say to someone, if I tell someone that I'm genuinely, that I'm sick, I'm usually probably genuinely sick. Yeah.
Fair.
But if I say like I have to work, they probably will kind of know in me, they will say, is it workout or is it work, or is it work like doing research because they know I like doing that?
Right, right.
You know, or is it literally grading papers, which I hate.
Who doesn't?
Oh, exactly. True.
Last one.
Oh, yes. Number 7.
Number 7. How do you define happiness?
I define happiness and I experience happiness on a small scale. I don't define it on a big scale of big events in life. I define it on an everyday experience.
Yeah.
For me, happiness is when I'm up in the mountains and I'm actually just free from bullshit of everyday life we have.
Yeah, don't think about nothing.
Free from things like thinking about taxes or thinking about how I'm
Yeah.
going to pay for the tuition of the kids or how I'm going to afford volleyball fees or, even free from the idea of what I'm going to eat,
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, yeah.
It is literally, kind of a friend of mine.
No decisions to be made.
My mountaineering partner here, he actually says that, I have religious experience when I'm in the mountains,
Yeah.
when I'm in the forest, and it is like it,
Yeah.
it is something where you encounter something bigger than yourself, more permanent than yourself, and something that doesn't judge you, doesn't
Fair enough.
make any view of you.
Yeah, yeah.
You don't even exist for it,
I dig that. I was reflecting on a phrase. I think my dad's custom combiner in Texas told him this phrase, but he's like imagining on a rocking chair sitting in front of a house. Sometimes I sits and thinks, and sometimes I just sits.
Yeah.
And that notion of just sits, even if you're hiking through
exactly,
the woods,
yes,
I'm
just
not
moving through the space and seeing the things completely differently.
right
And the amount
listening
of
to the
things you
birds
see.
or looking at
Bingo.
the clouds.
Yes.
Or,
I'm going to go on Saturday, for example, up into the mountains, and I know that trail, I know the river there, I know the waterfalls there. Last time I was there, you couldn't see the river, you're actually hiking over it, but you can hear it.
yeah.
And that experience, every moment is different.
Yeah, every time you take that trail, it's a different trail.
Bingo. So there is no such thing as coming in. Who said that? I mean, one of the Greeks, said you can't step into the same river twice. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's the most acute observation of reality. You can't step into the same time twice.
Yeah.
And the only time you experience that and you know that is when you are fully free, and that's it.
I dig it. We bribe our listeners to listen to the whole show, and so the lucky listener that writes in with the answer to that first question, the favorite childhood memory, that being the summer cabin outside of Moscow and the river, especially around it, we'll get you $25 from Chiba Hut from LoCo Think Tank. Um, we didn't really talk about your family too much, your kids or your spouse, your partner. Care to talk a little bit about that influence in your life? And
A huge influence, of course. The family is probably the most important anchor we have in life.
yeah,
Yes, that's the only thing that we have that physically connects us to time, which
yeah,
is an important dimension
interesting.
for us as human beings, um, and also to spaces. Okay, so I have two wonderful kids, completely different
Okay,
character-wise. My oldest one is a golfer. I
okay,
mean, was on a team for the Fossil Ridge High School. Competitive golfer. He is kind of like a person who can go and play 18 holes without blowing up.
hmm,
My 14-year-old will blow up,
okay,
can't play golf. She's a volleyball player. She played rugby before, so she's a very kind of scruffy and strong. But also is kind of amazing to watch her evolution as well. She's becoming, she moved from being kind of a very strong personality to being a strong personality, but also a kind of feminine balance to that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
personality.
Self-restrained a little bit.
Yeah, both are very good students.
Okay,
Both are kind of, not academically minded. They hopefully not going to go into academia. I'm
okay,
really happy with that. My oldest is kind of currently looking at, doing finance because of business
yep,
dimension, so applied finance. My youngest one is still kind of having big dreams, and
yeah,
she wants to do kind of medicine slash biology in her kind of studies. And she's oriented towards that, which is always amazing from
yeah.
my point of view.
Oh,
It's
neat.
really great to see. My partner, I call her my better half because she's a better half of me. She's more balanced than I am.
Okay.
She's
What's her name?
Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
So
Hopefully you'll
she's
listen to this one.
absolutely amazingly beautiful human being.
Okay.
We've met now.
Yeah, where did you grab her? I forget you.
So we met 30 years ago
When? Where were you
in
then?
Chicago.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We met 30 years ago this year in Chicago, and we spent those 30 years so far. And I mean,
Was it a romance right from the first?
yes, it was instantaneously. We have a lot of very interesting and strange connections for the Russian versus, she's, of course, she was born in Michigan, but she is half Italian,
Okay.
almost half Cherokee.
Oh.
And she works in a completely different field.
Yep.
She comes from advertising. Her, degree is in sculpture, so she's an art
Yeah.
major. We've met randomly through kind of third-party friends.
Okay.
And the first time we met, we had a fight. We
Perfect.
had an intellectual debate discussion, which was very heated, where she was trying to convince me that there is such a thing as an American art, and I was trying to convince her that all of the American art is really European art and is derived
Poor
from
copy.
European art. Not necessarily, no, fantastic copy, but I mean it's very different. So we had a art history debate.
Interesting.
Her view was, sadly, that what the hell does this economist from University of Chicago know about art? And my view was kind of probably around the same kind of.
Look how
time,
cute she
yeah,
gets when she gets
yeah.
sassy.
Oh no, absolutely, totally hot. I mean, but anyways, so we hit off right away. Her background growing up between the United States and Italy kind of matched my background growing up in other
Yeah.
totalitarian environment.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
okay, I'm kidding, of course, yes. In Soviet Union, but also having very strong connection with Italy
Yeah.
because I had family members in Italy. So when I grew up even in the Soviet Union, I was able to travel to Italy all of the time. In fact, my Italian was better then than it is now. So we actually hit off very well from the very beginning. And it's been absolutely up and up and up in
Oh,
that
and you had
sense.
10, almost 12 years, just the two of you before you started making littles too.
Oh,
So
absolutely,
that's a neat
yes.
adventure
More
time.
than that. Yeah, no, yeah, so 18 years versus, 30. Yeah, about 12 years. You're right, yes. So we had a tremendously productive adventure together.
Yeah.
There was a period when we painted together and exhibited. And of course, there was a period when we were building the family as well, subsequently. Genuinely, what works for us, very
Yeah.
interestingly enough, is that we retain our differences in the fields that we work in the interests we pursue, and we can bring those differences every day to a dining table, and
Yeah.
we can share them.
Learn from each other from
Exactly.
different things you're
That
learning.
learning process, like as I said, we spent 7 hours on the road, me and her talking.
Yeah.
And the youngest one sleeping because she was competing in Salt Lake City in a volleyball tournament there. Versus I took some time off in the mountains myself. Did a bit of climbing there, and
Yeah.
we were for 7 hours on the road, and we were having a conversation,
That's
me
neat.
and her.
After 30 years. to be able
After
to still do
30
that.
years, and that's why there's a way of saying that you find your soulmate.
Yeah.
She's certainly my soulmate.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, glad to hear that.
Cool.
Our final segment, the closing segment, is the LoCo Experience, and that's the craziest experience of your lifetime that you're willing to share with our listeners.
Oh,
So,
okay.
anything-
As in
yeah.
like loco.
A crazy, yeah. LoCo
look,
crazy.
I mean, growing up in the Soviet Union and having gone to the Soviet military, to the Soviet army for 2 years, you can have a menu of choices of crazy. Okay, I mean, when I grew up, if you think about it, kind of rite of passage.
Was it intense at that time in the Cold War and stuff
It was
too?
very intense insofar as that I was, of course, I grew up in the 1980s, and there was this breaking point of what we call inflection point, yes,
Yeah.
of the change that Gorbachev brought in as well. I mean, there's a lot of crazy experiences. I mean, we used to, when I grew up, for example, when we would go to the proms, equivalent of the proms, for example, we couldn't buy alcohol because Gorbachev has banned alcohol sales in the evenings. So, I mean, I remember we were drinking pretty much anything that burns, So, underage drinking in my background, in my childhood, would have involved, industrial alcohol.
Oh, dang.
Rubbing alcohol, stuff that
Stuff that make you
does
blind
bad
kind of thing.
things
Yeah,
to you, so crazy experiences.
And even
like that.
even though the rest of the Russians, the older people and stuff, had trouble getting vodka or whatever.
Yes, exactly. That's why that
interesting.
during that period in the mid 1980s, okay,
Yeah.
there was tremendous amount of deaths amongst the kind of older generation Russians who would be addicted to alcohol,
Sure.
who had to basically consume or were
Yeah.
consuming
They were
things
drinking a
that-
quart of vodka a day, and then they had to stop.
Yeah, correct. Yes, so they switched to brake fluids.
Oh, damn.
And we didn't do that as teenagers, of course, but we witnessed that. So I mean, there was we used to go, for example, fishing in the wilderness area outside of Moscow, and you couldn't get a train there, passenger train, because there's no stops there. So we would actually pay off under the table to the
The train
the conductors, train conductors, to drop us off there, and we would get on the cargo trains. Yes.
Yeah.
So
They
and they
stop
would
for you
drop
or
us
just
off.
slow
They
down?
would stop for us,
That's nice.
and then they would pick us up on the pre-prescribed day.
Sure.
Like a week later. And one time we were going, and we left, and we did our fishing, and we did our camping, and we got picked up, and they told us that the day we left was a big holiday. Half of the crew of the whole depot, there was about 50 people,
Okay.
basically ended up in a hospital, and quite a few of them died from drinking brake fluid. And like, if you want crazy, we were teenagers sitting with them when they started.
Wow.
And they were offering us to drink. We did, of course, because we had, we had the whole week of backpacking and camping. You don't want to do
Maybe
that.
just one bottle for the
you
road.
Like, you do not want to do that,
Right.
Even when teenagers, you headless chickens, but you still, don't want to do that.
Interesting.
So they're kind of experiences like that, okay?
So was your family middle class throughout this season, kind of?
Yes, of course, yeah. So my original family, my parents come from the mostly medical background.
Okay.
So doctors, my grandmother was a professor of medicine. Part of my family on my Armenian side, they died way before I was born. So as a result of that, I only know my father from there. But from my mother's side of the family, most of them were in the medical field. There's some of them were professionals,
Gotcha.
kind of, in the administrative
So a little
side
more
as well.
upper middle class, at least when there was a middle class.
But you have to remember that in the Soviet Union, things were upside down.
Yeah.
Yes? So if you're a medical doctor in the Soviet Union, you earned less money than if you worked at a factory. versus if you worked in a factory, you made more money than a medical doctor did. So kind of if we think about here,
Interesting.
medical doctors are upper
Right.
class.
Well,
Yes.
the education we require of it
Well, yes, but
requires it.
of course, but you also your earnings as
Sure.
well and your wealth that you
Yeah.
accumulate. So it was exact opposite of that in the Soviet Union. So big contention, for example, between, and that influenced me as well in terms of my current career as well. Of course, big contention was within my family between my grandmother, who was the academic medical doctor. So she was a professor of medicine. She was a surgeon, and so she kind of chose that career. And my father, who was originally a research doctor and then switched because of the low pay that research doctors had, kind of started his own underground practice. So he was getting,
Oh, interesting.
he was getting private clients.
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
would pay him, additional
Because the wait was
under
too
the
long
table.
or things like that.
Because
otherwise.
there's no income. You couldn't make ends meet. You couldn't afford
Right.
anything. If you
Oh,
were
you
just
couldn't regularly be a
yeah.
regular doctor.
So
You
yeah,
just
being a
couldn't-
professor of medicine, your salary was back in the days. Well, it wasn't like suppose associate professor of medicine. The salary back in those days would have been a quarter of what he would earn if he worked kind
wow.
of privately.
Interesting.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that influenced me as well because my grandmother drove my family. She was the power figure in my family, and she actually kind of instilled that idea of research focus into me. So for me, it was kind of, even though I started my career in business,
Yeah.
I always gravitated towards
Yeah.
academic life.
And your dad kind of started more in research, but got entrepreneurial because he had
That's
to.
right, yes. And that was a big rift between him and my grandmother.
Interesting. Any questions for me, Constantin? This has been a fun conversation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, we started the conversation with a kind of, local, northern
yeah.
Colorado, okay? And you asked me, what can be done in
Yeah.
terms of how can we move northern
Stimulate
Colorado
that to be
to
stronger and stay competitive.
yes, but also more resilient, not just stronger, it's more resilient, more being able to adapt, more being able to put forward the value addition that actually can be translated outside of Colorado as well. Yes? What, in your view, can do that? What do you think we are not focusing enough?
That's a good question. I think regulatory burden has increased a lot on business. I was a banker for 15 years before I started LoCo Think Tank, so that's 25 years. It has to be twice as time consuming to, and then the Family and Medical Leave Act, if you get 5 employees, and then you got this if you get 10, and you got to do this and that, and it's just kind of daunting. And especially for those little companies, the 1, 2, 3 companies that are, or the 49-person company that once they hit 50, then they're going to have to do a whole bunch more expensive things too. And so that burden at every level is definitely one of the challenge, I think. Certainly for Fort Collins, we don't really have like industrial sites and things. We've got a staff of 12 economic development people, but there's really not very many places for them to bring companies from outside into. And so I'm unclear personally why it should be such a large staff in that space. They're doing a lot of business engagement and, things around utilities and stuff. So that's kind of the real ground level stuff here. Being a libertarian minded though, I think, reducing state level taxes, I think is going to be a competitive advantage for states. I think I heard 2 or 3 states just announced that they're moving toward getting rid of state taxation.
On business.
No, on personal,
Okay.
tax other things instead of income tax, because that's been a big driver of people moving to Florida, people moving to Tennessee,
Yes,
things like that.
absolutely.
And so I think at least trying to get into the middle sector of the state income tax burden would be good. Yeah, it's a good question. I think, and whatever can be done, which mostly is regulatory of the cost of housing. It's not mostly regulatory, but probably 20% of the cost of a house is, R57 insulation, when really our climate doesn't really require anything more than 30 or something. But you got to put the 57 in because the 57 is better than the 30. Well, is it really? What if you can't get the 57, or if it's 5 times as much? So there's just a lot of building code obligations that are good in theory, but end up making everybody's rent $300 a month higher. So those are
So
probably the
cost
things that come
reduction.
to mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, that's for
That's
workforce
interesting.
things, so people don't get quite as big a shock when they come here for some jobs.
That's true, of course. I mean, the problem is that you wouldn't be coming in for the jobs anymore in Colorado because
Right,
the
if
cost
they're
of
not-
living is so high already.
Right.
Unless you are working in the sectors like, say, computational sectors or the
Yep.
airspace,
Higher margin type jobs.
Yeah, technology jobs.
And even manufacturing things. And we talked about agribusiness a little bit.
It's
There's going to be
interesting,
low-end
yeah.
jobs there, but there's also going to be higher-end jobs there. And manufacturing
Absolutely,
is
in
also always
manufacturing,
great.
especially robotics and so forth. But again, that is probably not so much driven by the cost of living, but rather by the availability of sites,
Yep.
availability of energy, availability of
Yep.
access to the transportation networks and things like that.
And I think
So,
that's
yeah.
where Greeley has Fort Collins and Loveland to an extent beat. They got so much more water. They got so much more green space, to the south and east especially, but also elsewhere.
I won't call it
That's
green,
suitable.
but yes.
Well, not
yes,
green,
yeah,
but that's
yes,
suitable
that's
for
right, yeah,
industrial
green sites,
development, call
yes,
it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a competitive advantage for, east of I-25 realm.
But then on the other side, it doesn't have that great connectivity. The
Right.
roads connectivity is not there, so transportation is
Yeah.
going to be harder.
True.
You
Well,
have,
regional cooperation. Like
Correct,
that's probably the
yes.
number
Yeah,
one
yeah,
thing for
yeah.
northern Colorado
Yes.
is regional cooperation.
yes,
So,
we need a clustering effect, and it's a clustering effect also means that you have places with higher quality of living, like Fort Collins,
Yep.
and then you have the places which have the ability to create the green sites, as you
Yep,
said,
yep,
for
yep.
development and so forth, which can be not just Greeley. Loveland is a natural development for the extension of the Fort Collins
Yep,
as well.
yep.
Kind of. So you have this natural corridor with
well, and
amenities
Cheyenne
here
even to that
as
extent.
well. Cheyenne is probably more on industrial and energy
Yeah.
intensive side.
Well, because they have, especially with the Air Force improvements
Yep.
going on up there's going to be a lot of critical mass
Correct,
of
yes.
systems
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
and connectivity and data centers probably.
Absolutely. So there is an idea for that, and it's a good question. Why, 8 economic development officers
I think
in Fort Collins?
12 in total. But
12.
there's a few
Oh,
that are
dear
more
me.
in the small
Okay.
business sector. They're going to be on in a few weeks, so I shouldn't.
I'm not going to
shouldn't
push you too
warn them
hard on that
before
one.
I-
Yes, exactly. But it would be. It's actually quite interesting because in being here for 3.5 years now, and being an economist by training and
Sure.
being involved before with the things like, say, policy development, excise taxation law development in Europe, I actually find myself completely not being, in any way, shape, or form engaged here. Um, I'm not making an effort myself, so it's not to say,
Yeah.
at all. But there is no outreach from the 12 in economic development.
Well,
There's
maybe somebody will look you
no outreach from the likes of Greeley either.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting that to me it is indicative of this idea of the siloed thinking that we have in a corporate world.
Yeah.
And having worked at IBM, I'm familiar with a giant corporate siloed way of
Sure,
thinking,
sure.
where everyone builds their own empire.
Right.
We build the walls around our own empire,
Right.
and we still have this fortress mentality.
One of the challenges with government employees, I've been told, is that everybody compares themselves to one another by the size of their staff.
Yes, that's true. By expenditure.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh,
IT department.
how big of a department do you oversee?
Yep. It's like the curse of the IT department in the corporate world equivalent. Yes,
Yeah.
They their CVs look, or their resumes look and read like I was in charge of installing $150 million system. Yes,
Sure.
You never really read what the system was supposed
Could have been
to
a
do.
$30 million system that worked better.
Exactly. Yeah. This is also why every purchasing, kind of decision favors large companies like Microsoft and
Right.
IBM. It's because you can't really go wrong. Yes,
Yeah.
you spend a lot,
Yep.
and you
But it
have
always
kind of
works.
back support. Well, does it really? That's a big question, Does it work? Yeah.
Constantine, I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for
Likewise.
making time.
Thanks, Kurt.
And
Absolutely.
hopefully you get a bunch of calls with companies that want to have interns from Monfort College of Business.
Would love to. We would absolutely welcome that.
Oh, not phone
Absolutely.
calls. Messages.
Phone calls,
Phone calls.
emails,
Anyway,
slow
passenger
mails.
pigeon.
Absolutely. We'll take it in anything.
All right.
In any form.
Godspeed, young man. I appreciate being here.
Thanks. Cheers.
Thanks, Ava.